Yeah.
Just down there, so you need to read it.
Every
I didn't do that.
I say that around every coin. I'd love to have a collection of proclamation coins, but they're beyond my pay. Have you got a collection of proclamation coins?
No, the Australian proclamations, you know.
All the real
The holy dollars.
all the real numismatics are like that's the fundamental collection in their series. King, Governor King. Is that right? King made
The proclamation. 1810, I think.
all the coins circulated in Sydney town. Holy dollars to silver dollars. He made a proclamation of Spanish dollars. How many coins are there? About 80?
I think it's about that.
Yeah, that sort of number, and that set is the sort of fundamental set for Australian numism.
The Johannes.
Look at it. Make sure it's all very expensive. Especially the holy dollar.
You're on candid camera, Don.
Yeah, small. Yeah, on candid camera.
1814.
Is anybody using that chair?
No, but that's even a little bit obscured too. So just be mindful of that. And Rod's got that one near the table there.
Okay, so that's how something on the screen.
Somebody sitting here, yes they are.
Yeah. What about, can I move that from there?
Yeah.
Because we've got sort of 2 or 3 chairs taken up with that there. If that's all right, and I can move to the other side.
Yep, okay,
That's all
we
right.
didn't bring one, so that's good.
And just for
I'll use 2 hands.
We don't have a clicker thing either, unless you've brought one of those as well. So,
Move that to the other side.
yeah, so it's just a matter of
so it's going to be on your
on whoever's sitting here.
sitting there.
I'm on your way.
Occupational health and safety.
There we go, just.
What's the time?
Ross Bradley's not here yet.
Ross is not here. Because he's not out there. I saw him before.
Postal Master.
He's Ross.
Yes.
He was
not here?
around. Is Ross around?
Yeah, we'll come to that before.
Ross.
He was at breakfast.
He's sick. He's got COVID.
Oh, I see.
So people are making his presentations on his behalf.
Oh, lovely.
Is Ross and Gordon, I think, is over there.
I did see Gordon. Gordon was just here. He told me.
Guys,
He just
Carol
got
had a bit of a tumble yesterday and she's coming down later on. So.
Okay.
There's Ross.
Hello. Do you ever use
He's back on later.
Okay, I'll catch him up at morning tea or.
We'll just wait till.
Possibly, use mine to use words.
Okay, so which one are we doing here?
Tonight we're going to do. Today we're going to do those.
Two of them.
You ready to go?
So those 1, 2 people.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, with usual precision, we're starting right on time, 9 o'clock. And
Well
welcome
done.
to another wonderful conference. The latest in a long series that started in 1986, if I'm not mistaken. And we had a medal put out for that one, and we've got a medal out for this one. And those that are here have got a named one, and that's great. So welcome along. I'd just like to make a special note at the start of the conference that there's at least 2 latest members who passed away, John Veltmeyer and Alex Rentoul passed away at the start of this month from Brisbane. And it's sad to have these losses amongst us, but of course over the last few years there's been more people than that. But there's also people who I know would like to have been here, but through ill health or other commitments are no longer able to attend, but were regular attendees in the past. People like Cole Thomas, who was one of the instigators of the series of conferences. Few housekeeping rules. The toilets are outside on this floor, and if you want to, there's also toilets upstairs. Tonight we're having our dinner, so if you can place your orders at the front counter and say a time around 6 to 6:30, give them that sort of flexibility, place your order, and you'll need to know your room number, and that way tonight will go a lot more swimmingly, I'm sure. And thirdly, tomorrow night at the end of the conference, we're already talking about the end of the conference, can you believe it? Tomorrow night, it's been the practice after the conference to go and have a meal at the RSL in the city, and in the past they've been good enough to provide us with a bus. Now for the bus we need to know how many people are going. So amongst the group here, who do you think would want to use the bus?
Yeah.
Oh.
Peter, you'll use the bus, yeah?
Yeah. Hands up. That we'll work on 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
I'm happy to drive.
Okay, 14. Okay, so if I tell them about 14, we'll try and organise a bus.
Will the bus bring us back?
It will.
They got to walk back.
Last time it was a bit iffy, but yes, eventually they will.
Now, at this time, of course, I don't know what time they're going to pick us up, but I'm going to ask for around 5:30, because if we get there a bit early before the crowds, well, I think that's a better thing rather than being there with the hurly-burly, which could be quite hectic. And now I'd like to call on our patron, John Pern, and he's going to do the real opening of the conference. Anyway, welcome, and away we go.
Well, thank you very much, Bernie, and from the desk of the patron, of course, it's wonderful to welcome everybody here, and particularly, of course, our conveners, Jerry Doyle and Bernie, and the committee which brings us together every 2 years. It's a wonderful occasion, and we look forward to it so much. Well, here we are. We're a very select group, but we're really, in a sense, bonded together by the delight of the science and the art of numismatics, which enjoins us all. We've come from very many parts in welcoming everybody. A very special welcome to David and Janet Mee, who've come from the Southern Highlands, and particularly to Gary and Janet Murray, who've incredibly, to get here, have used 5 forms of transport sequentially. They drove to Rockhampton Station, they caught the Tilt train to the Sunshine Coast, they then caught a bus to the airport, they then caught a plane to Coffs Harbour, and then a taxi to get here. 5 days. So you've enriched our conference very much, and we thank you so much. We're going to be privileged to hear some wonderful scholarship, of course, over the next 2 days. Our colleagues have put so much work into preparing these papers. It's an enormous self-imposed duty, but it's a duty of love to present these papers. And when we look back at the history of our biennial conference here, we think of those wonderful papers that we've been given. and the way they enrich all our lives with general knowledge, and also the specific knowledge of numismatics, the coins, the badges, the banknotes and the medals and medallions, and the fobs, which we all enjoy. So a very special welcome, and it's a delight from the desk of the patron to declare the conference open.
Very good.
You're the first speaker.
All right. Well, unfortunately, as you know, Phil rang a couple of days ago, said he tested positive for COVID. So he's unable to attend in Julie, but fortunately, Bernie is going to provide and present the paper that Phil's prepared, and so I'd like to call on Bernie.
I think John's speaking first.
John.
Number one.
Oh yes, sorry, John. Sorry. John's going to talk a bit about dollarisation, hyperinflation and monetary stabilisation. For those that don't know, our patron, John's been a patron for 18 years, from 2006. He's very active at all the meetings, and has even presented many papers on numismatic topics. He's been collecting for over 40 years, probably like some of us, grown up with that, and I'd like to call on John.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Jerry, our chair today, and welcome to all, of course. Every nation is proud of its currency, and the images which are portrayed on our nation's coins and which are featured on our banknotes reflect the very ethos of our Australian nation. Subjects which political leaders regard as very important nationally are those which portray the spirit and the uniqueness of any nation, and they're featured on each nation's currency, and as such they will endure, as we will hear over the next 2 days, as a record of history and heritage of a nation's history. The images which feature on a nation's currency comprise, and I quote, a myriad of symbols and metaphors, but they endure interminably and are in fact one of the most enduring of all of a nation's history. Next Steve. The monetary history of many nations, as we can see here, includes the catastrophe of rampant inflation. And the term inflation was first used in 1938, as we can see there, from the Latin verb inflare, meaning to blow up. In other words, the currency blows up and becomes relatively meaningless, ultimately. The term hyperinflation is a term used specifically by students of economy and of commerce, and perhaps also, not in Australia mercifully, but overseas by accountants, was first introduced in 1956, and was arbitrarily defined as that when the 1 monthly inflation rate reaches 50%. A terrible catastrophe for those nations where that occurred. The next slide, it just here illustrates some of the causes of inflation. All of us have experienced this personally in one way or another. The first cause of inflation is when there's a high demand for a limited supply of goods and services. And of course we're seeing this at the moment. This is one of the causes of Australian inflation today, particularly the war in Ukraine, which has had a crescendo supply effect on many other countries and finally spills over across the world to here in Australia. And our hearts and minds are with all those builders and tradies. 12,000, we understand, in the last 12 months have gone broke throughout Australia because of the massive inflation of the price of their basic cement and steel and timber, which they need for their building purposes. So high demand for limited supply is one potent cause, as we're seeing today. The second cause is usually due to a specific form of inflation, where there is an unlimited supply of money to buy a particular item or particular items. We see this occasionally in our own auctions at numismatic things, when somebody puts into the auctioneer that wonderful phrase, "no limit." In other words, somebody desperately wants something, has the money to pay for it, and that sets the new price, even although it can be just one person driving that. I myself have been guilty of that. I collect stone tools, prehistoric stone tools, as a hobby, and in Papua New Guinea, stone axes at a certain price, and I remember going into a remote village in the Sepik, and I wanted a stone tool, and coming from a wealthy country like Australia, I could really afford $50 or $100. It was of no consequence to me at that time. The price of that locally was about $1 or $2. So I paid that, and that causes that inflation at that. And we're seeing that today. We've seen it also in house prices, people buying houses and land. It's afflicted New Zealand particularly, where a lot of Swiss people have brought a lot of money to New Zealand to buy up land, which generally the New Zealanders couldn't afford, but great swathes of real estate now are in European hands in that country, and I suspect also in some cities in Australia, particularly with Oriental money that's been coming in as well. The third cause of inflation is when the coin or the paper money of the realm becomes debased. And we've seen this everywhere. All of us know as numismatists the history when a government or an emperor gradually reduces the gold value, composition of a coin, adds in copper and silver, it gradually becomes debased more and more. And of course, the punters, you and me, using the coins in our daily commercial transactions then become less confident in it and require, if we're selling something, more of that gradually debasing species that's there. And the fourth cause is something that we're seeing today, that is when particularly a government simply turns the printing presses unlimited, just pours out the money, and without any underpinning of goods or services from that country. We're seeing this, and this applies to every nation except that with the most powerful currency of the moment. So in the United States today, where the dollar is supreme internationally, the American government has gone, as we've all seen in the last 2 weeks, has gone into unprecedented debt now, but simply by turning the presses, pouring out more and more paper money, but that money is not debasing because it is so powerful, and it's still the primary one. But every other currency, when that happens, every other nation, when they simply turn the printing presses far faster, as we've seen, and we've seen in the catastrophe, the ultimate extreme in Zimbabwe, that is the major cause of inflation. Thanks, Stephen. The whole history of inflation and the science of it has been, of course, enormous library of books about it. Thiers' law was named by an American economist after a French politician, Thiers, Adolphe Thiers, as we can see there. And Thiers' law says that when merchants will no longer accept the specie or the currency of a nation for physical goods, then that is a definition of inflation. And of course, what happens is that smart people, then if inflation is coming, smart people, and those who are able to, start putting their specie or their banknotes or their currency of their land into other appreciating assets like gold or land or houses, as we're seeing in Australia, or real estate. This is disastrous, as we're seeing happening in Australia today, because this protects the assets, but those people who are smart enough or able financially to do that, therefore are protected from inflation, and they become more and more wealthy. And we see that all those that own a house and real estate in Australia today, almost everybody is a millionaire, because the median house price in Australia today is $800,000 per house. Whereas those of us who either don't have the opportunity or the wherewithal or the entrepreneurial skill to change their savings into an appreciating asset, but hold still the specie or the banknotes in some non-inflating, in the inflating currency of the land, they're the people that lose out. So what we're seeing in Australia today is gradually a polarisation. It's a very tragic phenomenon of a separation of classes, and we see that now, that there's an enormous class in Australia, and maybe some of us here, who can no longer barely afford the rent of a house. And every night on the news we're seeing that. So inflation is indeed a terrible scourge, as we can see. Now, since coinage was first invented, we all know this is the lecture 101 of numismatics, as coinage was invented in Lydia in 625 BC by King Alyattes, and there's been scores of examples of hyperinflation, that is, this rampant inflation reaching by definition a doubling of the inflation rate every month. We've seen that. The worst examples, we all know, in the Weimar Republic in Germany in the early 1920s. It was said that the height of the Weimar Republic hyperinflation, that if one took 3 cartloads of paper marks, tons of paper, to the paper mill, one could be, countless trillions of paper marks, one could be paid with 1 gold mark. For that. It happened in Greece and in Hungary, in Yugoslavia, and of course in Zimbabwe, the most tragic example of all, and it's the lesson to us all for the dangers of inflation, which when prices double, not every month, but every 24 hours. And we joke about this as numismatists, but it's a tragic story. This $100 trillion note, this represents the destruction of the life savings of perhaps hundreds of thousands of people that lost all their life savings. We collect these notes now, which are worth the paper that they're printed on, but it represents the problems of inflation. Well, what have some countries done to protect themselves from inflation? In our own nation, here in Australia, of course, we're seeing attempts to control it by increasing the interest rate, but not doing it fast enough to cause a recession. A very fine balancing act requiring very fine judgment, which only history will determine whether that rate of inflation control was right or wrong. But an alternative is to use a stable currency. That stable currency can be gold, it can be other forms of bullion like silver, it can be other things, or it can be the strongest, a strong international currency, currently the strongest of which, of course, is the American dollar. So the question is, are there any examples in history, recent history, where countries have gone into the process of abandoning their own currency and gone onto the dollar standard? This process is known as dollarization, hence the title of this brief talk this morning. The example that I have very personal and affectionate associations with are Ecuador. I took a tour group of historians to Ecuador 5 months ago. This is Ecuador. We all know the Galapagos Islands are part of the nation of Ecuador, which are here a great tourist beacon isn't it, at the moment? There's a coastal strip, there's the high Andes, and then there's the rainforests of the Amazon here. And Ecuador, the history of Ecuador is a wonderful history. It was, of course, conquered by the Spaniards, by the conquistadors, who enslaved the indigenous people. People gradually fought against that. The first person to do so was Sebastian Bellexar. He started the fight against the Spaniards. This is a plaque outside the Numismatic Museum in Quito, the high capital of Ecuador. And he was soon followed by two great warriors who fought against the Spaniards. That was Simon Bolivar and Grand Marshal Antonio Jose de Sucre, shown here. These two wonderful generals who fought against the Spanish rule, both have had currency named after them, of course, the Bolivar and the Sucre. And Ecuador adopted the Sucre as a memorial to this founder of Ecuador as the basis of their national currency. That was done in 1930. Sucre won a battle against the Spaniards of Pichincha near present-day Quito, up in those high Andes, and when the nation separated from Colombia in 1832, the new nation of Ecuador from that time named its currency the Sucre. Here is Sucre. This is in Bolivia, in the capital. The parliamentary capital of Bolivia is also the town of Sucre, also named after him. And here he is there, and here he is on the first of one of the early Ecuadorian notes. This is the commercial agricultural bank of Ecuador. Here is Sucre. You can see it's a one Sucre banknote. That's from 1910, before the scourge of inflation hit Ecuador. Inflation gradually developed, and notes of larger denomination were required for normal day-to-day commerce. This is the the 5 Sucre note, issued this time, as you can see, from the Central Bank of Ecuador, and there is Sucre again. This is the emblem of Ecuador with the condor. Yeah, in fact, I saw some condors in Ecuador. They fly at about 1 kilometre high. It's incredible, always in pairs, and you can barely see them above the high Andes, but they have incredible sight, and they can see a rabbit ear twitching, apparently from a kilometre away. It's an incredible story. With mismanagement, political corruption, and things and overspending, starting to turn the printing presses for money, the scourge of inflation and ultimately hyperinflation hit Ecuador as well. And I've just summarised here a chronological series of the value of the Sucre to the US dollar. And you can see from 1917, 2 Sucre to the dollar, right up to here by the turn of 1998, 5,000 Sucre were required to buy $1 US. And this reflects terrible personal tragedy, of course. It means the common people, farmers and so on, are losing their livelihoods if they're paid in Sucre. But the smart money, of course, goes out and buys land or gold or precious coins, or they leave the country. And 200,000 Ecuadorians left Ecuador permanently in the last 30 years here partly because of this. So you can see at the turn of the century, it required 24,000 Sucres to buy $1 coin. This is also reflected in political turmoil. One of the presidents of Ecuador was known as El Loco. He was psychiatrically disabled. Two were assassinated, and finally, the president of Ecuador, to save what was in 2000 the currency then. People had lost their savings and income, of course, at that point of time, but it was stabilised at one point of time by an Act of Parliament in 2000. And this meant it was stabilised at 25,000 sucre to the US dollar. So this coin of 50,000 sucre would buy 2 US dollars, and the buying power of that. But it requires enormous political courage, of course, to do away with the nation's currency. And the two presidents that tried to do this were both run out of town. One of them's died, the other one is alive still as an exile in Dallas in Texas. There were riots on the streets, but what Ecuador has done, it's remained on the dollar currency now, except for small change below $1. And so the nation has had a bet each way, but preserved a little bit of their national history and heritage in the centavo coins, which just are used for trivial transactions below $1. But above that, dollarization really, although it didn't help anybody who'd lost their savings up to that point of time, from 2000 onwards, it did in fact stabilise the currency. Now the industries of Ecuador are mining, petroleum, agriculture and tourism. And all those industries have their international currency, of course, in dollars, which makes it very simple. So, and everybody knows where they are. That currency is relatively stable at this point of time, and that really stabilised things. So I mentioned about El Loco, the Ecuadorian president. He was declared mentally unfit. Other presidents here that tried to stabilise the currency were unable to do so, and the Ecuadorians found themselves in that terrible financial crisis. And although there was riots on the streets, in fact the country went to dollarisation. But as is happening in Australia today, many people have losing their wealth at the rate. Our current inflation rate, of course, is 6.9%, which means that all those people, particularly retired people who have their money in fixed currency, are losing their savings at that rate. This particularly applies to senior people in Australia today. That applies to many of us here, of course, who have our assets in fixed income situations, and inflation is destroying that buying power. In my own case, my asset is only in my superannuation. When my death reserve, if I died when I was a young academic, would have bought 9 median houses in Australia. Today, that does not buy one house in my street where I live. So that has destroyed that saving and that investment. So that's the scourge of inflation today. So dollarisation is a phenomenon of that. The equivalent of that, of course, is people going into land or housing today, or gold, or inflating assets like coinage, precious coins and so on, which hopefully, at least statistically, although there are individual variations, as we all know, but will increase in price. And that's Ecuador is an example of that. This is the Numismatic Museum in Quito, the capital of Ecuador. And it's the old bank, which collapsed, of course. See, the Numismatic Museum is there in this wonderful building, which retains this history and what Ecuador did to control. Thank you all.
we have any questions for John? We've got a few minutes because I think we're waiting on Bernie.
I'm here.
Oh, yeah, can't see you.
Where do all the Ecuadorians move to? Just to America?
Yes, mainly
Mostly, yes.
mainly to the States, and a few to Canada. Ecuador has as Janet and David know, Ecuador has an incredible export in roses.
In which?
Roses, flowers.
Flowers.
I'm not exaggerating. 800,000 a day. One farm that I took a tour group to was exporting 400,000 roses every day.
What, so they got them flowering all throughout the year?
Yeah, oh yes, indeed. In the high Andes, it's beautiful for roses, and you know, several hundred workers on any one farm full time. Massive, and a lot of those go to Canada and to Europe. So Canada was, to answer your question, Canada was a place where they could also start a new life.
If inflation's so bad, why do you think the Reserve Bank has, as part of its rule, that we ought to have 2.5% inflation minimum per annum?
Well, one's sympathy goes out to the Reserve Bank. They're trying to juggle this, and they as you know, with the ABC is very hostile to them at the moment, and constant criticism of the Reserve Bank judgments being made all the time. But the joyous thing about the Reserve Bank is still mercifully independent. But there is enormous political pressure being brought all the time not to increase interest rates. On the other hand, the remit of the Reserve Bank is to reduce inflation, to try to protect the savings and the value of our currency. So it's an incredible juggling match. The figure, I believe, of 2 to 3% is an arbitrary figure, but historically in international history, it seems reasonable that it allows a little bit of increase in productivity every year and vigour, but it's not too great like it is at the moment, which is destroying the savings of people. And of course, in times of hyperinflation, it destroys lives.
Certainly it's better than the hyperinflation in Germany, but it's still, clearly, if you remember, just before COVID and so on, the interest rates were reduced to virtually nothing because we weren't having enough inflation, according to them. But it does mount up, even 2.5% over a lifetime, virtually makes savings at the beginning of your life nothing by the time you get to the end of your life.
That's exactly right.
By design, in my view.
All right.
Can I ask about coin circulation in Ecuador at the moment? I believe the American Sacagawea dollar circulates there, although it doesn't circulate very much in the US itself.
Yes, in Ecuador, everything is paid in dollars.
And the double coins?
They're $1 coins that don't circulate in America. They circulate in Ecuador.
That is correct. Yes, that is right. Yes, I don't have experience of the American situation, the United States situation, but I do believe, and Stephen is confirming that, I think that it's an unpopular coin.
Yeah. So if you find a heavily circulated American golden dollar, it's probably from Ecuador. It never saw circulation in America.
Curious.
Thank you.
What about Morgan dollars, Steve?
We're presenting
No.
certificates to all of our speakers, medals, and John, thank you very much. Now I'd like to call on Phil Benjamin, also known as Bernie Begley, to provide his paper. It's called Australian Aviation Concepts.
Well, this was a paper that Phil handed to me yesterday. No, not yesterday, the day before. So I volunteered to read it for him. Put a lot of work into it, and I haven't seen the slides before, but I have just read the paper. So we'll start off. In 1854, Dr. William Bland, a pardoned convict, Australia's first physician and founder of the Australian Medical Association patented a design for what he called an atmotic ship. And that's apparently, I make no claims that pronunciation is correct.
It sounds right to me.
It is literally Greek for vapour. This large ship, over 100 feet long, was to lift up to 100 tonnes, and he's used the imperial ton there. It was a platform with a steam engine-driven propeller and guided by tail vanes and suspended below a huge hydrogen balloon. In 1854, Bland exhibited prototype models of the atmotic ship at the Crystal Palace exhibition. With this invention, he hoped to revolutionise transport between London and Sydney, and also within the Australian continent. Sadly, the project was never realised due to various challenges in building such a vessel. I can well imagine that, Phil, as well as the danger of using flammable gas for flight. Robert Boyle produced hydrogen gas in 1671 while he was experimenting with iron and acids, but it wasn't until 1766 that Henry Cavendish recognised it as a distinct element. It's a sort of Zeppelin predecessor, Phil says. On the next slide now. Australia's first recorded human flight occurred on the 1st of February 1858 when a gas-powered balloon imported by George Coppin and flown by English aeronaut Joseph Dean rose from Coppin Gardens on the Yarra River to 3,000 feet and landed in Heidelberg. 45 minutes duration and travelled 21 kilometres. I understand that's quite a scarce medal. It is thought that a chap called William Green had done a balloon flight in Ballarat in January of that year, but this was not reported in the papers for some reason, possibly political. Next, please. Lawrence Hargraves was the inventor of the box kite, and on 12th of November 1894 he flew 16-foot model attached to 4 of his kites. He did not believe in patenting his work and believed in free scientific communication. His kite provided the theoretical wing model leading to the first generation of European and American airplanes. The first successful aircraft incorporated the cellular box kite wing, the curved wing surface and the thick leading edge to the wing. The first commercially available aircraft were built by the Frenchman Gabriel Voisin. He called them Hargraves. The Wright brothers had access to his work, but constrained by patent law and politics, they admitted no influence. I don't know what Phil would have said about that. Most of Hargraves' 176 working models were destroyed by Allied bombing in World War II in the Deutsches Technological Museum in Munich. The surviving 25 were restored in 1960 and are at the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney. And it says, read the slide.
That slide?
I don't know. Slide 4 was Lawrence Hargraves. Other kite flight attempts. Other kite flight attempts crashed and therefore don't count. All right, on to the next one, I think now.
This one?
Might be. Australia, so yes. So in 1810, the first powered flight in Australia was by escapologist Houdini in a VWASA Voisin biplane. And Australia celebrated its first heavier-than-air flight. George Augustine Taylor and his wife Florence flew a biplane glider from the top of the dunes on Narrabeen Beach in Sydney several times, with the longest flight covering a distance of over 600 feet. Maybe that's the next one. All right, well, we read this. William Edward Park, dentist, in his Bristol box kite, first qualified in Australia, aviation licence number 1. Was issued on 5th of December 1911. Aerial League of Australia. Okay, and here we've got Arthur Burr Stone, American aviator pioneer, flew his Blériot monoplane in Australia. Bert Hinkle became his mechanic. Let's go on to the next one. So this is for the air flight. Okay. Now, on the 16th to the 18th of July 1914, the French aviator Maurice Rouleau made the first airmail flight in Australia from Melbourne to Sydney. That looks like it. The flight took 7 stops and 9¼ hours flying time over 2 days. This was at the time the longest airmail flight worldwide. It was to be another 8 years before a regular service was established. The coin is a $1 from Tuvalu. Envelope insert below. Okay. So we move on to slide 9. The Great Air Race. Right. In 1919, the Australian Prime Minister William Hughes offered a £10,000 prize. Can't imagine what that would be worth today. £10,000 on behalf of the Australian government for the first Australians to fly an aircraft from England to Australia in under 30 consecutive days. The plane had to be British made. 6 teams entered the race that was won in 27 days and 20 hours in a Vickers Vimy GEAOU, which I presume's there. It's a bomber by Ross and Keith Smith with mechanics Walter Shears and James Bennett. The course was London, Lyon, Rome, Cairo, Delhi, Calcutta, Singapore, Surabaya and Darwin.
They jokingly said that that number, GEAOU, stood for God help all of us.
That's useful knowledge to know. Next slide, please. Right. They flew to Sydney and Adelaide with stops along the way. Ross and Keith were knighted for the flight. So there's the route. We can see there, ending up or terminating in Adelaide. Now there's 3 or 4 slides we have to read. So let's have a look at those. So here's some medals of the air race, 1969, by the Royal Aero Club, the Federation of Aero Clubs. So there's the 4 characters, 2 pilots and 2 mechanics. The medals for 50 years of the event, 1969. Okay. Oh, this is gold, marked 18 carat on the obverse. Okay. That's impressive. Next one, please. So here we have gold foil copy of the vignette attached to letters brought with them on the flight. Okay. Oh, there's the vignette on the... Oh, that's a stamp or something. That must be a vignette. Okay. Next one, please. There's God help all of us. Okay. 3 covers. Oh, so this is a 25mm $1, and that's a 30mm $1. Right. Okay. And the next one, please. War commemoratives. Oh, this is Fatty Bay in Darwin. First single-engine flight. Ray Parrott and John McIntosh, awarded £1,000. Ooh, took 206 days. Okay, that's a commitment. Next, please. Here's another one. Centenary of the England to Australia flight. So I think this is a medal. At that time, sea travel usually took over 40 days, and Australia was tucked away from the rest of the world and needed aviation. Then took until 1934 for the McRobson air race to show that Australia's isolation was over. Right, next one please. Now we're on to Bert Hinkler. Bert Hinkler was determined to complete the first solo flight from England to Australia. He was prevented in competing as his Dove biplane was considered too risky from competing in the 1919 air race by the officials. Undeterred, Hinkler made his first attempt a year later in an Avro Baby, but had to abandon the trip in the Middle East. Still determined, Hinkler eventually acquired an Avro Avian GEBOV, and on the morning of 7th of February 1928 he took off from Croydon, England, and made his first solo flight in Australia in that plane, and won fame. He took slightly over 15 days. Hinkler's flight provided an unexpected financial success when the Australian government gave him £2,000. Sounds like an unusual federal government. He was made an honorary squadron leader in the Royal Australian Air Force Reserve and was awarded the Air Force Cross. Bert Hinkler's 18,000 kilometre journey was not without incident. He was arrested in Rome when he mistakenly landed at night on a military airdrome. Could have happened to any Queenslander. Only the British consul's intervention saw him on his way the following day. Good. Hinkler reputedly plotted his course across Asia and the Timor Sea using a London Times atlas. He does say reputedly, as his navigational chart. Nevertheless, after flying 128 hours in less than 16 days, arriving in Darwin and his landing in Sydney, Hinkler's fame magnified and he was quickly dubbed Hustling Hinkler. This is the part I've been dreading. A nickname later immortalised in song. I hope you're listening, Phil. When he arrived in Sydney on 11th of March 1928, a crowd estimated at 80,000 gathered to welcome the hero, singing, "Hinkler, Hinkler, little star, 16 days and here you are." Don't know if that's anything like the tune, but I know Phil would have known it down pat.
He landed that plane at Bundaberg and taxied it up to his home to see his mum.
All right. I knew he was associated with Bundaberg. So here's two pieces here. And this is hanging in the Queensland Museum. And that's the original copper variation. I think they also come in electroplated, and there's 2 or 3 silver examples, I understand. But until the recent invention of XRF, it was difficult to tell the silver plate from the silver. And here's the masterpieces in silver from 2008. Now, unfortunately, I won't be able to help you with any questions you may have, unless it's rereading the paper. Thank you. And thank you very much to Phil.
That's very good.
Thanks, Bernie. Well, we'll probably move on ahead of time, but
We're ahead of time, are we?
we're a little bit ahead of time. That's a change.
Oh well,
But
might have an early morning tea.
yeah, that's right. Thank you very much, Bernie, for reading that on down. We have kept the certificate for speaker certificate for in the activity. Anyway, next
Right.
talk is by Rod Sell.
My talk today,
Title, Sandy.
I've entitled it The Effect of the 2019 Election on Australian Banknotes. Basically, I'm giving you a rundown of the polymer notes. It's surprising. We use notes every day. We take them for granted. Most of the time, except for the colours and that they have a value, we don't know much about them at all. So, the first polymer note was the bicentenary $10 note. It was a commemorative that was put out in 1988. But in 1992, the government decided to switch from paper to polymer. The polymer notes are much longer lasting, and they were much harder to forge. So they had the polymer notes there. So come 1992, they switched over from the paper note to the polymer note. The Reserve Bank has a website for banknotes from 1992. It goes up to 2021. So every year they give us a list of the notes that were issued. In 1992, they only issued the $5 note because it was replacing the $5 paper note. And the notes were all AA except for a few that were AB with the letter prefix. I collect banknotes. You guys probably know that. And I always collected banknotes. I always wanted the signature combination of each of the signatories for every value of note. From decimal notes. So we started off in 1966, and I can still remember in 1967 when I was working at Qantas Reservations, we got paid in cash. Many of you would remember getting a cash payment, and you had your banknotes and your coins every week in there. And every time I got a new note and what next, I tried to save it. And the hardest note in the paper notes is the 1967 $20 note. It has the Coombs Randall signature, and $20 was a hell of a lot of money in those days. It was 2 days' wages, so we couldn't, well, I couldn't save it. I didn't have enough spare cash to put 2 days' wages aside. So it's one note. The $20 Coombs Randall is one note I've never had in my collection in unk. I've got used ones over the years afterwards, because today $20 doesn't buy you as much as $20 did in those days, talking about inflation. But in 1992 we switched over to the $5 polymer, and in that year the note printing in Craigieburn in Victoria only produced the $5 polymer that you can see here. The signatures on them were Fraser Cole. So it was Bernie Fraser. We all remember Bernie Fraser from superannuation days. And Tony Cole was the other signatory. And this was the first $5 note. It was changed a few years later to a darker color because people didn't like that color. They confused it with the $10. The numbers that were issued were AA00 all the way to, can't see it from here, looks like AA
80.
91, is it?
AB 19.
AB 19.
AB 19, yeah. So, oops.
Sorry, you talked too long. It went to sleep.
We go on to the next one. Yes, so the following year, they put the $10 in. So they went year by year converting one note. But not only did they change the prefixes, the first two numbers from 93, the first two numbers on your banknote is a year was produced. So you look at any of your banknotes today, you can tell exactly what year it was produced. Ted Evans became Secretary of the Treasurer, replacing Mr. Cole. And again, this banknote. A few years afterwards, the colour of the banknote changed slightly. The one lot was sort of, they called them the blue and the greys. This one had a bit more grey in it. and they swapped it around to the blues. I'm not sure exactly why, but I think the blues, the ink took longer to dry because you got wet ink transfers on a lot of the notes. Onto the, sorry, before we go on. So this is 93. So you can add up how many notes were issued. Again, I collected these banknotes by type and by signature type. So because there was only a $5 and a $10 issued in that year, I only had to collect 2 banknotes to get the signature type, which was quite good. And in 94 we had the $20, in 95 the $50, and in 96 the $100 notes were converted. Next one, please. So this is the $20, the first $20 that we had, and they all had the Fraser Evans signature. So next one, please. So we come to 97. And in 97, they had changed over all the notes, so they can start producing notes as to what was required. They were starting to get worried about the year 2000. The Y2K bug was the topic of the time. And the Reserve Bank and the rest of the world really didn't know what was going to happen in the year 2000, whether it was going to be doomsday or not. And the Reserve Bank anticipated that we might have to go back to a cash economy for a while. So they were producing lots and lots of 50s, and then later on hundreds, just to make sure they had good supplies of the high value notes in case we needed to go back into a cash economy. And in that one, those notes under those letter prefixes are test notes. So they were testing the static state of the substrate, the plastic substrate that was using. So they were worried that the plastic notes could stick to each other, which they do sometimes. So those were test notes. But also you can see they produced the 5s, and then the 20s, and a lot of 50s. And they were all McFarlane. So Bernie Fraser had been replaced by Ian McFarlane at that stage. And the purple color note on the $5 was, this $5 was made a lot darker from the earlier ones. Next one, please. The Y2K was still on their minds in 1999, and you can see the numbers of 50s and hundreds that they made. When we look at the AA to CF, the second letter of the only goes as far as K. So in each A there's only 11 different letters. In each B there's only 11 different letters. So if you're a bit like me, I'm jumping ahead. So the McFarlane Evans, they've made a lot of these Y2K emergency notes ready. Next one, please, Phil. Y2K didn't happen, and they didn't produce any banknotes at all in the year 2000. I don't know why, but I assume it was something to do with Sydney Olympics. I think they were probably printing so much else for the Sydney Olympics that they had good supplies of the notes, so they didn't print any. But we had our centenary of federation in 2001, so they issued these special centenary of federation notes, and these notes were only produced in 2001 and were put into circulation. We all probably remember those notes. Next one, please. 2002, Ted Evans was replaced by Ken Henry as Secretary of the Treasury. And they were producing 5, 10s, 20s. Again, they had test notes for those 20s. They were testing the durability of the ink. Next one, please. 2007, Ian McFarlane was replaced by Glenn Stevens as Governor of the Reserve Bank. And there were 5, 20s and 50s, I think it is, that were produced. Next one, please, Phil. Stephen, I should say. Right. Ken Henry is replaced by Martin Parkinson in 2012. And this is the first time the Parkinson signature appears. Stevens Parkinson 2012. There's examples of those two notes. Next one, please. Now we're getting to the stage where the new notes are due to come out. But in 2015, they produced the 5s and I think it's the 20s. No, it's 5s and 10s. 2016. Because Parkinson, on the $5 note, we have the Parkinson signature at Stevens Parkinson, and because the following year we went into the new $5 note, this is the only year that they had that signature combination on the old $5 note. And as a result, I can remember when we cut over, trying to find the 2015 notes, the $5 2015 notes of Stevens and Stevens Fraser. It was very hard. I was looking for notes and it was very difficult. Next one, please. Okay. This is the new $5 note that we all use today. The numbers that were produced up until this stage, they printed 1 million of each of the serial prefixes. From this note, they printed 10 million of each serial prefix. So it was a lot easier to find those serial prefixes. The prefixes went from AA to EJ, I think it was, yep. 16. So there were 54 different serial prefixes in it. And I decided at that stage that not only was I going to collect signature combination, I was going to try and get every serial prefix, which I did. But it was easy to get in that day because the market was flooded with these notes. They changed them over very quickly. And you got the new notes straight away, and you found plenty of them. And I got all 54 notes, and usually with 2s and 3s, running numbers and what makes it was pretty easy with the 5s. They also produced the old $50 note with the Stevens Fraser signatures. Next one, please. In 2017, we had Phil Lowe became governor of the Reserve Bank. So we have the Lowe Fraser signature on the 10s and the hundreds. Again, by this stage, I'm stupidly trying to collect every serial prefix. They went from AA to EA, so there was only 45 to collect this time instead of the 54. And again, if you plod through, you can get them. Next one, please. In 2018, we saw the 50s introduced. Again, AA to EJ, no, AA to EA, and then EB to IB. So there were 90 letter prefixes to collect. But as I said, even putting one aside of each starts to get expensive. By the time I look at it, and I say to myself, you got $5,000 space. But it's in a forced saving. I didn't mention earlier on, but we all know, on the polymer notes, there's the little braille imprints for the people have vision impairment to see the braille, so they're quite handy. But with 50 letter prefixes, it was starting to get expensive. Again, I'm still looking for half a dozen serial prefixes because the Reserve Bank has been obviously issuing them starting with the A's. And the new notes that you see nowadays, they all are EFGs and yeah. I've got one I think I have IA but not IB. But the EFG and H's, the earlier prefixes, the A's and what next have been around a few years and they're all pretty crummy notes now. However, next slide please. We now come to the topic. 2019 was election year. Not that many years ago, we probably remember it. All the polls had Bill Shorten and Labour winning by a landslide and what next. And Scott Morrison was running around the country giving his talks and what next. And it certainly looked like, Labour was going to win until Mr. Shorten decided to change some of the tax rules and things and stop franking credits and a few other things and encouraged Scott Morrison to win. As a result, I think that Scott Morrison actually deep down believed he was going to lose because his head of state, Philip Gaetjens, he made Secretary of the Treasury in late 2018, early 2019. So suddenly we find that Fraser was the Secretary of the Treasury, but he got replaced by Gaetjens. So when they were producing the notes, they had some for Fraser, some for Gaetjens. After ScoMo won the election, he wanted Gaetjens back as his head of the Prime Minister's department. So Phil Gaetjens' term in office as the Secretary of the Treasury was a very short period. And when we look at the $20 notes, because John Fraser was only secretary for a very short time, really, they didn't make very many notes. There was only 189,000 of each of the prefixes found, and then it starts from 02 up to 34 million for the Gatien notes. As a collector trying to collect each of the serial prefixes, I've got to look for two notes because they're the same numbers. It's twice as many notes to collect. But it's really hard finding those ones because the numbers are so small. I don't bother to look for the signatures. When I collect them, I just look for the numbers because I know it starts with 01 and 02 is the start of the Gatien. So I'm looking for the notes that start off with 1901 or 1902. That's my way of finding them quickly without looking at the signature combination. And even now when I look, I've only found about half a dozen of those notes in nice condition. They're really not that easy. The display is sitting on the table over there. You can see the different numbers. But basically it's sort of 17 to 1 is the proportion that they turn up in. The next one, please, Phil. Oh, hang on, before we go to the next one. Could we go back one?
Yeah, done.
Yeah.
Or back another one.
They also started producing notes, the new $100 notes. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
In
100.
2019. Now, the $100 wasn't supposed to come out till 2020. But they started actually producing them with the Gatien signature in 2019. Go on to the next one, please. Yeah. So, in 2019, talking about the 2019, yeah. We can go actually. How is it? Gatien, Kennedy, yeah. Yeah, so they started producing the $100 notes in 2019, and they didn't produce very many. It's about 100 and something thousand of the low Gatien signatures. Again, the 2019 $100 note is a very hard one to find. I think I've got 3 in my collection. They're not easy. Not that we use $100 notes very much. I mean, you go to an ATM, it's always $50 notes that you get. So to get $100 notes, you really have to get them from the bank or from the odd. I think ANZ has a vending machine that gives you $100 notes. On to 2020. There's 2020. We have the Gatien 50s and the Kennedy 100s that come out. As I said in the top, with the 2019 $100 notes, they're hard to find, with only 188,000 of each of those serial prefixes found. Now, most people here probably couldn't care less because $100 notes is all you wanted. You wanted to spend. But idiots like me who collect it, not only do I have to find 54 of each of the prefixes, I've got to find 2 lots, one for each of them, and it makes it expensive. When I look at it, and I tell my daughter and son-in-law, if we ever have a fire make sure you grab that red folder with all that red folder, because you know it's got $10,000 worth of face of banknotes sitting in it. So that's the one to make sure you take with you. But it's been an experience trying to get it. But really, when there's a lot more to sort of banknotes than originally sort of meets the eye. But luckily now with 10 million of each, I should be able to find them given time. But the hardest thing is you want them in uncirculated condition. You don't want a grubby note. I might have to settle for a fold or something to get some of the hard ones. But that's part of the challenge. And with that, I'll say thank you to all. Try and answer any questions. Any questions? Bernie?
Rod, how do you find or get access to the volume of notes that you need? Because people are using cash less and less.
It's all on the website.
But where do you find the notes? How do you get the notes?
No,
Do you walk
right.
into a bank?
You don't get the note. I mean, that's the trouble, Bernie. That's the
Do you
hard-
have tellers that you have
Where-
contacts with?
I'm lucky because I live in Sydney, and the Reserve Bank is in Sydney, and the Reserve Bank will actually exchange notes with you. You can go once a week and you can trade $500 worth of notes. So I go to the Reserve Bank once a month because I'm in the city for lunch once a month with my Qantas friends. And on that one day in the month, which was last Thursday, I usually go around to the coin dealers, go to Nobles, go to the Reserve Bank, change the notes. I give them $400 of notes, used notes from my pocket, and they have a little form. You show them your driving license, and you tell them you're giving them 400, and you tell them what you want. And I say I want 200s, 250s, 320s, 310s, and 25s. That's $400 worth. I call it money laundering.
Please don't call it that.
Yeah, it has a different meaning to other people. But so I go there and I swap the notes with them. So I do get it, but they're not quite that cooperative. They have their stack of notes and they say you want 200s. They take the top two off you. There's your 200 nice brand spanking new notes. They may not be running numbers. Can't be helped. They're not going to swap it. Just take what you get and say thank you and go home. And I get home and I put them in my little file and I find I've already got those notes. I don't, you know, what do I want another $200 notes? You know, can I afford to put another $200 notes in there? So that's when I decide, well, these two will just have to be spent, which is a shame, but that's the way to go. Yeah, John.
Rod, the two signatures on it, one is the Secretary of the Treasury.
Yeah, Secretary of the
That's
Treasury.
a public servant. That person is a public servant, is that correct? Or
Yeah, and the Governor of the Reserve Bank.
is he a public servant, or is the Reserve Bank a government
No,
body?
he's a public servant.
Is he?
Yeah.
Yes.
Secretary
And
of the Treasury.
is the governor an elected position by the board of the Reserve Bank, or is that an appointee? I follow just all the current
The
talk
government
about.
of the day nominates who's going to be the Secretary of the Treasury. So it's a public servant, but you know it's one that's more favourable to one side or the other. When there's a change of government, very often there's a change of the Secretary of the Treasury.
Because in the context of the inflation debate at present, I thought that the governor of the Reserve Bank was independent of government influence.
But it's still appointed by the. It's still, you know, appointed by the PM or the government there. So You know, it's like
They can appoint them, but they don't get rid of them.
Phil Lowe's tenure sort of finishes at the end of this year, and he's still waiting to hear if he's going to
Yes.
be renewed or not. So, you know, the government still has a bit of say as to
Right. In all your fossicking through all these numbers,
yeah.
did you ever come across any solid numbers? No. No. And what about
I
number
have
one?
a quick look for solid numbers and radar numbers.
Right. And what about number ones?
What is a solid number?
Well, the serial numbers are all the same, like 777777.
Now, would you believe?
Some people collect first and last AA and EA of each one. But basically, when the notes are printed, they're not printed all AA. They're printed AA, AB, AC, AD. They have a
All
big
on the same sheet.
and they have about 25 notes or so on the sheet, and they produce it. And when it comes to numbering, it's AA, AB, AC, and it's all 001, 002 as each sheet comes down, and then it goes off and gets cut up so that they're all in nice numeric order. So,
That's
you know, people
more.
who collect by first and last or what next, it really, I don't bother, because AA or AB, none of them is really first. It's just the first letter in the alphabet. You had another question, Ross.
Yeah. Now, we actually used, and I'm not exaggerating, hundreds of thousands of $1 and $2 and $5 banknotes in our promotions. Never came across solid numbers. And, you know, I'll have to ask Alan Flint where they go to. And then as far as number ones are concerned, you never saw those.
I have a Chinese friend who obviously has contacts somehow, because he's ended up with sort of numbers ending in 88. You know, they love the number 8, 888. And I can remember one day at Phyllis, Tony was flashing these new $50 around, and I said, Tony, you got spare ones? I'd like some of the new $50 notes, because I hadn't seen them before. So I gave him $100, and he gave me 2. And they were the same number. No, different prefixes, but the same number. So suddenly I got 2 running numbers ending in 88, and I said, hey, I was hoping to get 2 running numbers, but getting 2 prefixes of the same number, I think, is even better.
But that just means they're off the same sheet.
Yeah, but how do you get the same sheet without going through
but at the IBS Congress or convention in Goulburn a couple of weeks ago, I puzzled a member, Scott DeYoung, who's a keen New Zealander. And would you believe he had a contact in the New Zealand Treasury, and now he's got a deal going where they keep number 1 and he gets number 2 of each issue.
That's handy.
Incredible.
Well,
Absolutely incredible.
Usually note printing and what next, I don't think they release the first 1,000
No, possibly
notes.
not.
They're put away for charities and other things that they want to use those numbers for. Any other questions?
Just one quick question and a bit of interest, Rod. I was working with the Commonwealth Bank for many years. I ended up being in charge of note issue department, and my job was to hand out money from a safe with many millions in it to all the other banks. So we provided the other banks with all their new notes. And this was quite interesting, and these numbers and changes were not even thought of in the 40s and 50s when I was involved.
Yeah.
But what we did was rather interesting. All the used notes, ones that were crumpled and so on, they were sent back to us, and we had to destroy them. We had a machine which you fed the money in and had holes, and then they put holes in the notes, and bundled and sent back.
Was that before the Reserve Bank was?
Oh yes.
It was when the Commonwealth Bank was the issuing bank.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we used to destroy these and then send them back for the notes to be reused, recycled. But I ended up destroying some of the old Australian banknotes, which I know what I know now. I would not have done it.
Well, the same thing with the
Non-system busy.
with the early paper money. I still got a lot of £1 and £5 notes.
Yeah.
Every so often, with stamp collectors, when the estates come in,
Yeah.
they inevitably have coins and banknotes and things, and these little old ladies have all the pound notes, and they would go to the banks, and the banks say, "Oh no, sorry, we can't go. Take it to the Commonwealth Bank," and they'd go to the Commonwealth Bank and say, "No, sorry, we don't want it. You have to take it to the Reserve Bank." And so all my stamp friends know I collect coins, and I say, "I'll take it off you. It's more convenient. Give it to me." I can remember 10 years ago, a little old lady wanted this roll of note sheet. It was about 140 pounds or so, all rolled up, and I paid her what the bank would have paid her, and was looking through. And I think, Barry, you won some of the £5 ones at one of the auctions we had here. I had 2 £5 notes, running numbers.
Yes,
And it was, you and Merv were fighting over those. I didn't even realise, but Merv told me afterwards that one of them was a radar note.
Yes, it was too.
Yeah,
I remember getting that.
but there were two running numbers for, £5. But it was interesting with those because the Queen Elizabeth £5 or Queen Elizabeth pre-decimal notes started in 53 and went to 65 before decimal came in. But in 1960, Reserve Bank started. So you look at the £1 notes, and it's H.C. Coombs is governor of the Reserve Bank, and then the governor of the Commonwealth Bank, and then governor of the Reserve Bank. And at the last Nobles auction we had, I work at Nobles during the auctions, showing the lots. And this elderly lady and a younger man with her came in, and they were looking for the special set of notes of sort of pre and post decimal notes. There was a pack put out, and they were saying, I say, "Oh, do you collect these?" And they said, "No, we only collect the Coombs notes." They wanted Coombs, and I immediately said, "Well, if they only collect Coombs, it must be a family." So, I was quite curious. I said, "Is H.C. Coombs a relative?" And she said, "Oh yeah, he was my grandfather, his great-grandfather." So I said to the lady, I said, "Can I ask a personal question? How did he get the name Nugget?" That was called him Nugget. And she was saying, "Look, we lived in Western Australia, in the, I think it was the Kimberleys or the Goldfield sort of area." And she said, he was quite a short kid. So he was always known as Nugget. So it had nothing to do with gold. It was just his stature why he became called Nugget Coombs.
Okay, thank you very much, Rob.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you very much.
I think the morning tea's coming, so we will break for morning tea and recommence at 11.
No, I think I'll let that one go because it is that staggered start.
Our country.
All the best for the talk, really. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh,
I'm going to get some
get your
questions.
expectations up too, right?
I think some curly ones, eh? Let off a bit lightly.
Everyone's ready? We'll start again. And our special note, the first speaker.
There are perhaps as many answers as there are respondents. There are those who have served our nation in countless ways, and there are those who've exhibited unimaginable courage, both in peace and in war. Many unrecognised, of course, and many of them unknown. There are others who have enriched the lives of thousands through their philanthropy. And there are countless others, both known and unknown, who deserve the accolade of famous Australia, whether such accolade has ever been bestowed or not. Can I have the first slide, Stephen? I want to ask the question, which Australian's life has saved the lives of countless millions, both in the past and in the future? One name stands out, that of Howard Florey. Lord Florey gave to the world the clinical use of antibiotics, and his struggle to do so was immense and included his resolve to work initially on an enigmatic project nobody else was interested in, simply in the first instance when he started work on antibiotics, simply to advance knowledge, to work with, and he worked with meticulous and inspirational benchtop detail, alone with just a few workers in the Sir William Dunn School of Pathology in Oxford. He worked in that chosen domain of experimental pathology. But he overcame insuperable problems of the lack of funding support for his work, and he worked on and pressed on in the face of initial apathy in his chosen field of antibiotic research. But ultimately he gave to the world, freely and without any personal gain whatsoever, the clinical domain of antibiotics. Now, Lord Florey's name is followed by the two highest post-nominals in the whole world of science, OM-PRS. The Order of Merit, as everybody who's numismatics in the medals knows, there's only 25 living members of the Order of Merit at any one time. And the highest award in the world of science is to be President of the Royal Society. So OM-PRS, when you've got that, there's nowhere further to go. So Lord Florey, OM-PRS, is my choice as the most famous Australian. And it's been said in the history of medicine, the world honours four people: Jenner, of course, who gave us immunisation; Pasteur, who gave us the concept of germ theory of disease; Lister, who gave us antiseptic surgery, all that means today, and Florey. The logical sequence of those four people over 150 years changed the world from, on the one hand, the situation of almost therapeutic helplessness in management and understanding of disease, within 150 years, the virtual defeat of the most important of all infectious diseases. Now, following the award of the Nobel Prize to Florey in 1945, scores of accolades were bestowed upon him throughout Australia. The suburb in Canberra, as you know, is named after him. The Florey Lecture Theatre in Canberra is named after him. The Florey Building at the University of Melbourne, the Howard Florey Institute of Experimental Pathology and Medicine, renamed simply the Florey in Melbourne in his memory, and the Florey Institute in Adelaide, and his statue in North Terrace in Adelaide as well. And in 2006, the Australian Government renamed the National Australian Student Prize the Lord Florey Student Prize in his offer. Now, all nations, and our nation specifically, issues on its coins and banknotes and its postage stamps what the country believes are the most important features which define our nation. And in this way, numismatics and philately, of course, create the most enduring records of a nation's history and heritage. And it's not surprising that, apart from the portraits of the sequence of our monarchs, Lord Florey is the most featured person in the clinical combined domains of numismatics and philately. His life is portrayed in accumulated millions of Australian coins and banknotes and postage stamps. Florey is the only person, the only Australian, to have been depicted on both an Australian banknote and an Australian coin, and the only Australian to as well have been featured on two quite separate postage stamps. Who was Florey? Well, he was born in Adelaide and educated at St Peter's College. He was school captain of the school. He did medicine at Adelaide University. But he had an inquiring mind, and that his persona didn't sit well with the dogma of medicine. We all remember when routine tonsillectomies were the norm, operations for fallen kidneys, non-disease, a whole range of other things, routine circumcisions for little boys, infant boys and so on. All those things have gone. And Florey's persona was questioning at that time a lot of dogma. It didn't sit well. He didn't get honours in medicine, but he graduated, and in his 5th year of the 6-year medical course, he was awarded the Rhodes Scholarship for South Australia. He went to Oxford at that time, and after that time he had various appointments, and in Sheffield, in Cambridge, in Oxford itself, in the United States. And he came back to Oxford and was appointed in 1936 as the Sir William Dunn, at the Sir William Dunn School of Pathology. He became interested in antibiotics, what now are called antibiotics, that is, germ-killing properties of normal body fluids. Breast milk, for example, contains an antibiotic called lactobacillus. Tears contain a natural antibiotic called lidozyme. And he was interested particularly in tears, and he was interested in these substances which had natural killing power in the body. He developed in fact, a spermicide as an oral contraceptive, and he called that oral contraceptive Volpan, voluntary parenthood. Well, miles ahead of his time. Now, 10 years before, Fleming, who was at St Peter's Hospital, St Mary's Hospital in London, Fleming was a fairly sloppy pathologist, and he went off for a long weekend, and he left all his culture plates out on the desk. And when he came back on the following week, he found, to his surprise, that one of the culture plates had become infected, as that always happens if they're exposed to mould. And he saw that the mould around one of the culture plates, which had formed, had killed a zone of bacteria all around it. And he wrote it up and published it in 1926. And he didn't do anything more, and he forgot about it totally, and it remained dormant, unrecognised and uncared for in the literature for the following 11 years. In 1937, a young Jewish refugee from the terrible events which were happening in Nazi Germany at that time came to London. Ernest Chain was his name. He was a brilliant young biochemist, and he showed Florey this paper from Fleming's, which had lain dormant for the previous 10 years. And Florey thought it was worthwhile having a look at it. And in 1940, on the 15th of May, Florey set up the experiment. They tried to grow penicillin with great difficulty in the lab. They set up culture flasks. The whole laboratory was full. Florey had been threatened with withdrawing his funds because they thought his work wasn't significant. Oxford University had threatened to withdraw their funds for his laboratory, and but he pressed on and grew this penicillin, and on the 15th of May 1940, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he set up an experiment with 8 mice. All 8 mice were given a lethal dose of streptococci injections, the germ, fatal germ, and 4 mice were given an injection of a tiny amount of the penicillin broth. And at 3 o'clock next morning, Florey and Margaret Jennings, who's a laboratory assistant, came into the lab. The 4 control mice, unprotected, were dead. The 4 mice who had the tiny dose of protective penicillin broth were all fine. One of those mice died 2 days later. But that was an experiment which was to change the world. And Florey pressed on, and the whole lab was set up. They used bedpans to culture the broth. It was incredible to concentrate it down enough. Florey then did the toxicity experiments and showed that the strange substance penicillin was completely non-toxic, was completely safe to the experimental animals. This in contrast to sulfonamide drugs. Sulfonamide drugs had only been introduced in 1936, in the time we're talking about. But sulfonamide drugs only act if they're swallowed. They don't act topically, they don't kill bacteria at all. They've got to be changed from the liver to another drug, sulfanilamide, and under those circumstances they have important killing power. Sulfonamides come from coal tar, from an extract from coal, but they're very toxic, and they cause liver damage and skin rashes, and about 1 in 30 people have very toxic, serious reactions to the sulfonamides. So Florey pressed on with what he called a magic bullet, that is something that would kill bacteria but which wouldn't kill the host, which the bacteria were infected. Well, the story is well known, as we can see. He generated these tiny amounts of penicillin. This was one of the doses, the first dose used for a policeman in the Redcliffe Infirmary in Oxford. He was given what they estimated was 15,000 units. Children I treated with penicillin in the 1960s were getting 3 million units, third hourly. So these doses were shown to be dramatically effective at that stage before antibiotic resistance developed. Florey gave this substance to the world. It was said that Florey himself was a man of deep reserve. He never sought publicity, unlike Fleming. His style was always to understate. One of his most brilliant workers, when they came to show him in his room, he said, "Oh, that's no slouch." It's an understatement. And as I've said, he shunned life light. He had almost no personal friends. He was very focused. He was friendly with his laboratory assistant, Margaret Jennings, a very devoted woman, who after Lady Florey died, he remarried Margaret Jennings. She and I became close personal friends. In fact, she stayed with us on several occasions here in Australia, in Brisbane. It was typical of Florey that on that first famous penicillin paper, a published paper which was to literally change the world, in the Journal of Experimental Pathology, he listed the 5 authors in alphabetical order. He did not put his own name first. And it was just so typical of him to do that. And as we can see as well, his approach was straightforward, etc. He didn't have any of the emotional things that a lot of other people who are here today, self-promoting and so on. But Florey, Fleming, who made the discovery 10 years before, and who came back 10 years later out of the blue, turned up in Florey's lab and said, "I see you've been working on my penicillin." Chain was the expat, Jewish German, and Florey is here. They were all awarded the Nobel Prize for medicine. And sadly, Fleming was condemned by many people for his. Many people felt he didn't deserve the Nobel Prize. Chain fell out with Florey because Florey insisted that the penicillin be not patented, be given freely to the world. Chain, who'd been stung by the lack of support and the funding always in their research, felt that that was a mistake, and that the penicillin, the concept of antibiotics, should have been patented and all the money come into the laboratory. But Florey said no, it was to be freely given. for the world. Well, they were awarded, as we can see here, the Nobel Prize for Medicine. This beautiful gold medal, it's 23 karat gold, solid gold medal. It shows on the obverse here Nobel himself. On the reverse here is the goddess Isis, a Roman goddess, one of the lesser goddesses. She's here obtaining healing water from a healing spring. She's supporting a dying patient here. And here's the Aesculapian serpent of healing, as you can see on that incredible, beautiful Nobel Prize medal. That's in Oxford today. Here's the $50 banknote. Rod Sell, I want you to eat your heart out here. You can see this Fleury banknote has got the prefix HF, Howard Fleury.
You got that from the auction.
I did. It was a wonderful banknote. But it shows here, here's Fleury wearing his white tie and tails, which is traditional for the receipt of the Nobel Prize at the ceremony in Stockholm. Here he is. This is the fungus. Here are the mice that he injected. Here is Fleming's original plate showing the where the fungus has landed. There's a killing of the bacteria, which was the primary seeding of the plate here. The symbols of learning and scholarship and books in the background. Here is the dollar coin that we all know. For the Howard Fleury centenary of his, he was born in 1898. This is the $1 coin.
Was that a circulating one, or?
No, it's a
not.
C mint mark, so it's a packed coin.
No, that is correct. We can just have the next one, Stephen. This is the obverse, as we can see here, profile of our Queen, of course, on that. It was the last Australian coin to have the Raphael McLoof portrait of the Queen on it, and that's on the rear of that coin. As Ron has just said, the coin, the Fleury coin with mint marks, was only issued for collectors by the travelling Royal Australian Mint around various capital cities of Australia. It was sold in there with various mint marks, and I've got those on the next coin. These are the 5 mint marks known from the Fleury coin, and I've put there the numbers of coins that were struck. That adds up to 330,000 odd coins. These were non-circulating. They were sold in those packs as to collectors by the travelling mints when they went round. Those of colleagues from Brisbane will know that the one was set up at the Brisbane Show, exhibition grounds, and other travelling mints with the mint marks there. Both the one in Melbourne and the one in Adelaide had 21,000 only struck at each mint. As well as the standard $1 Fleury coin, there's a beautiful silver $1 coin for us as collectors. That's shown here. It's a proof coin, very, very beautiful one. And the medals of the whole host of medals, both in Australia and overseas. This is the Michael Mazzaros medal of the CSL Fleury medal. It's one of the top awards for science in Australia. As you can see there, I've specified the criteria for its award. It's awarded biennially to an Australian biological researcher for significant lifetime achievements in biomedical science. The next slide. And this one here, this is Andor Mazzaros' medallion. Only one of these. It's in the National Portrait Gallery in Canberra. And this is the Howard Fleury Young Investigators Award. I haven't got a copy of this medal, but this is taken from a description of the medal. This is the medal here with, again, the fanciful bacteria, microorganisms there shown on that slide. It's the CSL Young Fleury medal for those of us interested in this particular area numismatics. So, just to summarise, I think if one asks the question, which I asked by way of introduction, which Australian's life and works has saved the lives of countless millions, one name does stand out, I believe, that is Howard Florey. You can see there he had immense struggles, lack of funding, pressed on in the face of apathy, what's new to many of us here, and ultimately he gave to the world, freely and without any personal gain, the clinical world of antibiotics, which has saved so many lives, countless millions of lives, and I'd be very surprised if there was anybody in the room at all that hasn't had multiple courses of antibiotics through our own life. Sir Robert Menzies in 1968 was quoted as saying, I quote in gold at the bottom of this slide there, in terms of world well-being, Florey was the most important man ever born in Australia. I think in modern anti-sexist language you would say the most important person ever born in Australia. I hope I've convinced you, thank you Stephen, that this is my hero. I was privileged to be awarded the first Florey Fellowship of the Royal Society in London and spent 3 years on that fellowship, so I do have a conflict of interest in promoting it. Thank you,
Very
Stephen.
good.
Any questions? John?
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Move on to our next speaker, who's Bernie. Yes, I think everybody knows Bernie. Bernie's current president of the ANS Queensland branch. He's been a member for the ANS for 56 years.
Wow.
And Bernie's going to talk to us on Hallstone jewels. When you get to
Sorry,
Thanks, Bernie.
my apologies for being late and tardy and disorganised, but that's how I am. So, next. Thank you. Numismatists are well acquainted with the jewels presented to office bearers in a range of friendly societies. These often have the same structure as military medals, consisting of a top suspender, a cloth ribbon, and then the bottom part with an inscription outlining details of the award. So go on again, please. So here's the bottom part with the suspender. This is clearly a Masonic piece with Masonic dividers and square and plumb bob if I'm not mistaken. And the name of the lodge in this case is shown there, number 816 of the Scottish Constitution. Next one, please. Here's the presentation to the individual person, presented to Brother Langridge and by the brethren, the date, and up here are some fineness marks. In this case it's made out of 9 carat gold. Next one, please. These are often, most often encountered are Masonic in origin and are commonly given to the worshipful master upon completion of his term leading the lodge. Early Australian examples are usually found in gold and made by jewellers, many of whom are well known for this type of work. Less commonly encountered are commemorative lodge jewels. These could be for a national event such as the Australian 1954 Royal Visit, or more local activities such as the opening of the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Sometimes jewels were used to raise funds for the Friendly Society, such as their homes for the aged, and to recognise donations to the UK Masonic Institute for boys and for girls. Now these are a yearly series that are put out, beautiful enamel work. The older ones are all silver, hallmarked. Next please. That one was for girls, this one's for boys, and in this it's got a steward's title at the top. Next one please. Here's one for the aged Masonic home. The principal one I understand is at Sandgate, just at the outskirts of Brisbane. These earlier ones were again in 9-carat gold, including the bar but not the pin at the back. Next one. So here's the clear illustration of what it's all about. The mother, 3 children, clearly they're in distress because they've got no clothes on. And I think this is an allusion to the tiled floor in the Masonic lodge, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. Next one. And here's the dedication on the back. Name of the lodge, the person. Usually they've got a date. These are Queensland examples. I don't know of this sort of thing in the other states, but it's possibly there too. Next one. Right. In 1919, the Grand Master of the English craft, that's Masons, proposed building a new headquarters as a memorial to the many brethren killed during the Great War. The fund was to be known as the Masonic Million Memorial Fund, and contributions to it were recognised by commemorative jewels. In this case, a 35mm silver medal on a blue ribbon was awarded for 10 guineas or more donated. So 10 guineas in 1920 was a substantial sum of money, and so you can see the allegorical figure here, presumably is at peace, I'm not sure, but the dates 1914 and 18, the Masonic, again, dividers and square at the top, and here she is holding the temple at the front, Masonic temple. A 35mm silver medal, which this one is, on a blue ribbon was awarded for 10 guineas or more, and a gold medal for 100 guineas or more. So by the time you get into 100 guineas in 1919, you're talking about blocks of land and that sort of equivalent, so it's a big deal. 53,224 individual jewels were issued, each engraved on the reverse with the donor's name and number. Just click on the next one. Oh, there we go. I was unusually thorough there. And this one shows the hallmarks at the bottom, Birmingham, and the date letter is for 1928-29, which this one is dated to, and the maker's mark is BM Co, which is the Birmingham Metal Company. Several of these silver jewels have been sighted in Australia. I'm not saying that they were awarded to Australians who gave towards the English crafts temple, but they could have been. But they could have just found their way out here in the normal course of trade. Somewhat similarly, a gold jewel on a blue collarette to be worn by successive masters of the lodge was granted to any lodge that contributed an average of 10 guineas per member, with such lodges to be known as Hall Stone Lodges. 1,321 lodges, both in the UK and overseas, qualified as these Hall Stone Lodges, and their names were inscribed on the commemorative marble panels in the main entrance vestibule of the newly built Freemasons Hall in London. Next one, please. The design of the medal, the outcome of a competition was won by brother Cyril Saunders Spackman, RBA RMS, and was described at the time in these terms: the jewel is in the form of a cross symbolising sacrifice, with a perfect square of 4 ends to left and right, squares dated 1914 to 18, which we've already talked about, and the winged figure of peace is the woman shown in the middle. Now, the concept of a Hallstone jewel is not restricted to England. A look at the National Library of Australia's Trove reveals at least 2 references to this fundraising technique in South Australia in 1925 in connection with the new Adelaide Masonic Temple on North Terrace. It was mentioned that the Tatiara Lodge had generously donated £100 and was awarded a Hallstone jewel to be worn by those who occupy the master's chair of the lodge. Closer to this rider's heart, these hallstone jewels were also used in Queensland. In connection with the new Ann Street Masonic headquarters planned to be built after the establishment of the United Grand Lodge of Queensland in 1921. The UGLQ was formed from the amalgamation of the English, Scottish and Irish Constitution Masonic lodges in Queensland. With a similar approach to the English Brethren, the temple was to be a memorial to the fallen of World War I and prominently displayed a memorial urn on its ground floor. Again, Trove revealed reports of these jewels being granted. Jewel number 20 was awarded in 1927. So they started in 1920. They're still giving them out in 1927 to Comet Lodge. Now, Comet is a very small town west of Hampton.
Not far from Emerald.
But I was thinking more in terms of Emerald.
Yeah.
But that won't concern most of the listeners. And also, in 1929, a jewel was given to the Hopetown Lodge in Killarney. Again, Chillico received their medal in 1932 and McIntyre Lodge in 1933. So this is at the height of the Great Depression. The effects of that are well being experienced. Now, I'll skip over a bit here. These tantalising snippets of information were later greatly augmented by a detailed paper on the website of Toowoomba Lodge 132H, titled "The History of the Hallstone Jewel." The construction cost of the Brisbane Memorial Temple was to be funded in part by a £4 levy on each member. So £4 is not an inconsiderable sum to the craft from July 1925, and at the rate of 4 shillings half yearly thereafter. New members joining any Queensland lodge after that date had to pay a guinea towards the new temple, as well as the 4 shillings half yearly like the others. Lodges were separately asked to make voluntary contributions of £2 per member towards the cost of the temple, and if a contribution was made from a lodge of at least £50, a Hallstone Lodge jewel, which we'll see more in a moment, would be granted to the lodge. These contributions could be spread over 5 years, so you can get the feeling that these sums of money were hard come by, that they've got to spread it over 4 and 5 years, and they're collecting contributions of 4 shillings a half year. These days, people would say 4 shillings, what's that? It's only 40 cents. It would have been close to a day's wage in those days. As well as this, considering the various adverse effects of the Great Depression on the economy, nevertheless, 117 Hallstone lodges, jewels, were awarded to lodges, resulting in £73,760 being raised for the Masonic Temple. This was a sizable portion of the estimated cost of £130,000, so they had more than half in hand from these fundraising projects. That included land purchase, building the construction and furnishing. The jewels were numbered on the reverse. Just see whether this one is. No. Okay. Perhaps another. But that, if you could just take it back, Steve, kind enough to do that. The jewels were numbered on the reverse of each and inscribed with the name and number of the lodge, with jewel number 1 going to Prince of Wales Lodge number 3, H. Each lodge that was awarded a Hallstone jewel was entitled to include the letter H in its lodge number thereafter. And I think someone here today could confirm that that's still the practice. Not me. Each lodge that was awarded... Now, the Hallstone jewels were made by the firm Wallace Bishop of Albert Street, Brisbane, and it is reported that the actual craftsman who constructed them was Eric Fox. I was called Fox. Two were designed by brother F.J. Wilkes. Brother Fox was initiated in North Australian Lodge number 7 in 1910. And I think that's one of the oldest lodges in Queensland, isn't it? Says my authority in the stalls. So this is awarded to St Patrick's Lodge number 5, as you can see there. The Toowoomba report continues. The jewels were made from gold sovereigns that had just been withdrawn from Australian currency. They were composed of this is a quotation, 22 carat gold alloyed to 9 carat, melted and rolled to 16 gauge, roughly in the form of a square. They were placed in a lathe and recessed, leaving 2 rims, which is this outside as far as I understand it. The letters Hallstone Jewel UGLQ was stamped on the die, which is a block of steel, and soldered in position. So again, this is a direct quote from the website. Next one, please. That's the back of the top part of the jewel. Next one. So here you can see UGLQ Hallstone Jewel. And as it says in there, struck with a die. The wreath at the bottom, which we can see, was cut out by hand. The disc in this middle part here, the disc enamelled blue and surmounted by the UGLQ coat of arms. So you can see the coat of arms clearly there, divided by 2 swords. And silver line, and was also stamped on the die and fixed in the centre of the jewel. Above the jewel, the square and compasses and the letter G were mounted on a cube, here being the cube and the G with the square and compasses. They were all handmade, the cube being shaped from a block. The frame above this section was cast in cuttlefish. We can go back, please, Stephen, again. So this part here is actually cast in a cuttlefish. Now everyone knows what a cuttlefish is. It's the interior structure, I suppose you'd call it, of a squid, backbone is it? Backbone of a squid type animal. And if you're walking along the beach, it was a great practice to pick these up, and you saw them, take them to a friend who had budgies, and the budgies would do something with them. But they were all, it was nice, clean material. There was no dead flesh or anything like that on it, and they're generally white, and they could be worked and engraved. So, the frame above the section was cast in cuttlefish in 2 halves. So just like casting Chinese cash, one with the template impressioned and the other plain, half plain. And the 2 sections wide together for the molten gold to be poured in. So they do up a little shape of this thing, and then presumably on its edge, in goes the molten gold, and Bob's your uncle, you've got a casting. Not in sand, like the Chinese cash are, but in this case in cuttlefish. Inside the frame, the name of the lodge is enamelled in dark blue. That's blue enamel, not terribly clear from my angle anyway, but it is blue, not black. It goes on. Jack Love, whose business was in the Burnett Lane just off Albert Street, which is in the centre of Brisbane, did all the engraving on the jewels. All the jump rings, that's the connecting parts up there, and would have been in this part here, I think it's got a jump ring. All the jump rings, as well as the fasteners at the ribbon around the neck, are 9 carat gold, at the bottom of the jewel, and on the reverse side is stamped WB 9 carat. And again, this is all quoted from this website put out by the Toowoomba Lodge. Both Eric Fox and C.W. Bishop were members of Brisbane Lodge number 279 UGLQ. The years 1925 to 1930 were times of the Great Depression. The average weekly wage at that time was the equivalent of $11.17. Today, the average weekly wage is computed to $500 plus, and this is writing some time ago, obviously. These early brethren sacrificed more than 1/3 of their week's wages to build our magnificent centre. Are we as generous today? And that concludes the quotation from the Toowoomba Masonic authorities. Now, apart from it being a very beautiful piece, thanks Stephen, you'll notice the method of construction where the two parts are pinned together. This is the jump ring and two pieces of soldered other jump ring, I suppose. And if we go down a little bit further, and on the back, you'll see that this is attached quite mechanically through these squared off tiny bolts, I suppose you'd call them, because I think they could be removed. And here's the Puri mark and the maker WB. So Wallace Bishop is a very well-known firm of jewellery retailers, and still operating, and still got a very large and modern premises in Fortitude Valley, not far from the CBD. And again, it spells it all out nice and clearly. Presented to St Patrick Lodge number 5, Hallstone Jewel Lodge number 24, June 1928. So as far as details of what this is all about, there's a huge amount of information on the piece itself once you know what a Hallstone jewel is. But the intriguing part of this is what I find. It's most unusual to find details recorded of the actual craftsman who made the numismatic piece of this nature, together with details of who was the designer, as well as the name of the engraver. Eric Fox is well known in Brisbane commercial history, as he purchased the business of A.J. Parks, the well-known badge makers who operated at Salisbury, in a large factory there, and the medalist in 1941, badge and medal maker and medalist in 1941, and C.W. Bishop is better known as Wallace Bishop, owner of a chain of jewellery stores. So it's got just about everyone identified from every aspect of making this piece, the designers, the engravers, the manufacturers, how it was made, and when it was made. So a picture of the, this piece shows all that information. The main part is 45mm diameter, so it's not a small thing, excluding the compass, and the smaller top section is 30mm by 27mm. So when you add 30mm onto 45mm, you've got something that's 75mm in height, if you want to put it like that. Queensland Freemasons report that St Patrick Lodge held its first meeting on the 28th of December 1863. And its last meeting was held in June 2010 at Stones Corner Masonic Centre, with 12 members attending, 10 of whom were past masters. So you can see that there was a problem with the ages there, interest had run out, as happens by 2010. The foundation stone of the Ann Street Brisbane Memorial Temple was laid on Anzac Day, in April 1928. The building was opened by the Queensland Governor on the 11th of December 1930, so it took a couple of years to build. The fact that at least 2 Hallstone jewels were awarded after the opening must indicate that they were part of the 5-year program of donations, and that obligations were and these obligations were achieved after the building was finished. So that's all I've got to say about Hallstone jewels. If you want to take it back to the previous one, just to give you an idea of what the design, I think. This is enamel work here, and there's a faintest hint of damage there. Not done by this man, but by some careless mason or previous wearer of it. But it was something that's very important to our knowledge of this area of collecting, in the fact that the way it was made, the people who made it were prominent in not only the Masonic world, but in the numismatic world too. So, any questions?
Yes.
John Byrne.
Stephen, could we just go back to that one, Stephen?
Which one?
That one, yes. I have an interest in numismatic wreaths, and it's interesting. Bernie's emphasised the importance of the craftsman who actually made these, and Mr. Fox was.
Yep.
You can see what he's done here. He's used a ribboned, enjoined by circlet here. This one is a fruiting laurel nobilis, the laurel denoting worth or excellence. And on this side here, he's used one of the Queensland industries, the wheat sheaf. And this concept of using hemicirclets of different floral emblems in numismatic wreaths really gained tremendous traction. If one has a look at a lot of numismatic items, we see this craftsmanship. It's done obviously at just the will of the craftsman who's doing it.
Yes.
He's chosen that.
Yeah.
My question.
But it's got a message to it.
Yes.
Yes, John.
My question is, what is the origin of the name Hallstone? What does it mean? Does it have a Masonic meaning, or?
I suppose the hall is the meeting place, and the stone would be reminiscent of, say, a foundation stone, or in Masonic world they also celebrate the capstone, don't they?
Yes.
That holds the arch together.
Stone was usually by the masons right back in the early days building cathedrals, so the stone was very prominent.
And long lasting. The things are awarded in gold. Gold lasts forever untarnished or uncorrupted, and so does enamel. So there's a lot of symbolism here in the terminology, but I'd say the Hallstone term was simply lifted from what was being used in the UK, the mother establishment of the craft.
Any other questions? Yes.
Sorry, John?
Maybe there was an idea you were buying a stone for the building, sort of thing, like a brick, something.
But like all the lodges are contributing stones, and all together it builds the temple.
It could be, because you can see here at the very top of this piece, the stone is being measured by the dividers, and I suppose everything's on the square, as is the term. So there's a lot of symbolism there, and as you say, it could be like a modern charity drive where you supposedly buy a brick by giving a certain amount.
Who would wear that?
The master of the lodge.
While his master?
Yes.
During the meetings.
Yeah, and it remained with the lodge. It didn't remain with the master. The master would be given a separate award, like the one was shown early on in the slide presentation, which is a bit ratty, that one. But it was given to him. Thanks for your year of service. But this remained with the lodge, as does to signify or to verify that they're entitled to use that term H in the lodge's name.
I've just got a
comment here from a man who knows more about this than me.
But if I just add that I ended up joining the Thespian Lodge in Stones Corner, and that was 268H, and it was formed in 1918, and I was fortunate to be the master of the 99th and 100th year, and I had to wear one of those, as you know, And it was very important because they insured it for between $5,000 and $10,000 those days, because it was a very valuable item for the lodge. And I wore it at every meeting, and at the end of the time we handed it on to the new master. But it was a symbol of the lodge, and most lodges wear it with great pride.
How would it actually be worn? It's on a long...
It's on a ribbon round
so
the
it's
neck.
around the neck, not
Yeah.
a sash like this
Yeah.
with a...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, John.
Just on the back of the envelope calculation here, 10 guineas is the price, the digital donation. Today, that is buying power using the median price of houses in that year. And today, that's equivalent to $8,000. Today, buying power, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Incredibly
This
generous
would-
donation.
I don't think you could have that made today. I doubt that could be made by jewellers. Now, there might be skilled men that I'm not aware of, but even those quite simple type sheet gold example that was shown first up, we might go back to that one if you wouldn't mind, just at the very start, just to give you an idea of how simple these are in comparison to that. A bit more. There, that'll show you. You can see that this is just a couple of pieces that are cut out, soldered together. You can see there's bits of solder there. I won't say it's just working with tin snips or anything like that. I'm not going to degrade it. But the one more back, please. The difference between that, these are all generic type letters and numbers that will be used to make up the name of the lodge and the number of the lodge. I mean, this sort of ornamentation here, well, that's nice engraving. I'll give them full credit for that, and would take a lot of work. And this is alluding, I think, to a thistle because it's the Scottish Constitution, whereas the St Patrick's one, I think, is maybe Irish Constitution. But the workmanship in that is not that. It's a significant piece, would have cost a lot of money in its time, but the skill that was put into that Hallstone jewel is just another leap altogether.
Any other questions? If not, Bernie,
Okay, and thank you to my assistant in the audience. Oh, thank you, sir. Very much.
speakers. Still ahead of time. Right, you've done well. Our next speaker is Ross Pratley, well known to us all, and he's going to talk. He's got an hour. Why collect postal notes?
You can boo,
rarities.
you can boo if you wish. But we'll try and struggle on. I didn't think I was even going to make it because I was got a dose of COVID from the IBNS conference. All similar number, down at Goulburn a couple of weeks ago, and nobody wears masks, nobody's wearing masks, and we came back with COVID, and passed it round. We're very generous, but I don't know, people are a bit lackadaisical about it because it really got me this time. I ended up on the Tuesday night with feeling it, and no, bad news. But you can go to the shopping centres, nobody's wearing masks and such, and so it goes on, but it's certainly prevalent. A couple of apologies. I've got to pad this out, maybe. But I approached two of our past visitors here. Tony Dalton, you might remember. Yeah. He runs a successful archery business and with his sons. But he dearly wanted to come along. I was going to have company to drive up with, sort of thing. And Tony has regular colonoscopies has them every 2 years, and he had one on Thursday, so he dearly wanted to come, but anyway didn't make it. Another one, Bob Clemson. Do you remember Bob?
Yeah.
Well, he's definitely getting better, but he had his brother and sister-in-law who are helping him. I don't know whether you're familiar with what happened to Bob, but Bob was discovered in airline. He was about to fly out in India, and he'd been wandering around there for a couple of days, and a taxi driver alerted people, and they got hold of him and were able to, with his identification on him, phone his brother, and his brother ended up flying over there and bringing him back, and he had an aneurysm, and he's been out of it in a big way. Won't exercise, just sits and watches TV, so, you know, but what I will grant him is he did sound a lot chirpier when I was speaking to him during the last week a few times. But I feel guilty because I haven't been to see him. Colin Pitchfork's been helpful and what have you, and of course he's no longer at Nobles. But yeah, sad one to go. And then to finish off these guys, Mick Fort Ronald. I've been in touch with him and such, and he's been given a prognosis of about 5 years. And he's got some strange cancer in the bones, and he has to go for blood transfusions every couple of weeks, sort of thing. So there you go. Now I'm disappointed with the numbers, but you guys are the heart of it all and the strength and what have you. I was only saying to Bernie earlier, we should follow or look at maybe jazzing it up a little bit, because the IBNS run a good one, where they include an auction, which then they're able to lower some of the costs of actually attending it. But of course the auctions run with donations. They also have a bourse if anybody's wanting to sell some things, and I was lucky. A couple of Noble sales ago, I was keen to mark anything Mark Freehill, and I came across this lot in documents or whatever that mentioned that there was a couple of postal orders in it and such, so I just had to have it. I think it cost me about $900, estimate of about $400, and they gave it to me in a crate, and what it was his stock that he used to take to fairs and such, which is full of hundreds and hundreds. The postal, if I'd gone through it, I wouldn't have bid for it. But anyway, I gladly took it down to the IBNS Congress at Goulburn, apologised that I hadn't donated anything for their auction, and said, look, I'll give you 10% of what I sell out of these Mark Freehill items. And remember guys, these haven't been taken to fairs for probably 5 years, so there's got to be some bargains there. Anyway, I ended up giving them $134 donation to the thing, but it helped defray some costs. But I ended up bringing most of it back with me. So for $1,340 sold at the bourse, and paid $900. So we're getting there. What else? Any other reminders? No. We better start. Oh yeah, I'm still editor and General Secretary of the Postal Order Society. Once again, that's one that's dwindling in numbers, but I've got them to do a Zoom meeting, and we do a Zoom meeting every couple of months, and it's extraordinary what guys come out with and actually show from their collections. But I'll pass this around because you might get bored otherwise. But, we'll rattle along. All right, Stephen, come on, help me, please. I'm going to wing most of this. Right, so there we are. There's Rossi with a piece of insignificant wood. But then you've got to press another one. Oh, and here we are. Here's Rossi at his uncle's place in the Blue Mountains. Very young Rossi, and I was told by a reliable brother of mine who's multi-years older than me that was my first financial review that I was reading. Right? And another one, please. And here we are with my mate Dawn Fraser. Now, how did I meet Dawn Fraser? 1992, we were going for the Olympics, and I was in my pyjamas one morning watching the news, on Channel 9 of course, and they went to the ballroom of the Wentworth, and here was some celebration for getting trying to go for the games, and Dawn was there. So Ross straight into his suit, into his one-tonner, park on free on the loading zones, shot into the Wentworth, park anywhere those days, and leapt into the ballroom and introduced myself to Dawn. And she obliged, absolutely fabulous. I got her to sign, we bought the Barcelona dollar coin in large numbers. So the promotion was to get Dawn to sign a number of these. And then Dawn introduced me to some of the Olympians, Susie O'Neill, for instance, Matthew Dunn, and how I got, and who was Laurie Lawrence. And how to meet those was at Forestville. They were having one of their short course swimmings. So Rossi races up there and charms Susie O'Neill. But getting to talk to those Olympians was just phenomenal in itself. They're just so inspirational, you know, especially when you consider the swimmers, you know, don't get the money these footballers get and so on. But they're just dedicated, truly dedicated, and went on for years. So that was a good one. Alrighty, why I collect postal notes amongst other rarities. So next one please. Here we go, where we designed, I wonder if it comes down a fraction, no?
No.
Designed and produced, we were selected to do the medals for the Sydney Sesqui celebrations. You can't get it down? What a pity. Oh, anyway.
I can lift the table.
Oh, yeah, that'll do. But had to get permission for the effigy of Her Royal Highness from Buckingham Palace, and this one was a good one. The 50th anniversary of the Coral Sea Battle. What that involved, because you know you produce these medals, you got to sell them, you know, move them out. The tunnel was another story in itself, but this one went down to Garden Island, we were positioned there and what have you, and I had a good mate, I don't know whether you recall Ray Kalita, he was also a racing car driver, but he came and helped me to try and sell these medals. Anyway, nothing was happening. Just there was hundreds of people walking by. Nothing was happening. A very attractive young lady was walking by, and I thought, I've got to do something. So I went up to her, interrupted her with her boyfriend, and said, "Listen, you've got to come and work with me." And she said, "What are you talking about?" You know, so I raced through, ended up with a phone number that she was a hairdresser at Avalon. And the following day, they said they felt sorry for us, so they moved us to the gangplank of the Independence. Next one. And that's the mighty Independence. Something like 6,000 sailors, they were all out on leave and they were coming back. We ended up trading for 23 hours, 25 hours straight. Rang up my dolly bird, had a couple of dolly birds, called them her daughters, of course. And the sailors were wrapped. They were off to Iraq, to the Gulf of, Gulf of Iran or something?
Persian Gulf.
Persian Gulf, yes. But the response was phenomenal. Max Stern always said to me, if you can't sell something, just double the price. So the gold plated pennies, instead of what was it? Instead of $5, they were $10. And they were sending over, ones that weren't allowed to leave the ship were sending down rope with their hats in it, and yes please, you know, and up they'd go, and money, you know, kept on pouring in. And they said, the commander came around and said, would you like to do a tour of the ship? Would you like to go? Now you've got your choice. You can go with the Dalai Lama, or
The other guy.
no. Oh, why can't I think of him? Isn't old age dreadful? Song Sung Blue.
Neil Diamond?
Neil Diamond. Gotcha. Thanks. Save me again, man. So, and I said, right, I'm going with Neil Diamond. So, of course, we did the tour with Neil Diamond, came down and I said, look, Neil, come and have a photo with my daughters. You know, so presented him with a medal and what have you, and in the photo you should see his security guard. His security guard's just about to pounce on me, you know. So that ended up quite successful. We rolled along. All right, let's move along. Okay, so the ultimate matching rarity. I think I've shown the 20 Spanish dollar note before, but of course the printing plate came up, and Stuart Wright's got a phrase of calling some of these supposed very keen customers wood ducks. So I was definitely a wood duck for Jimmy Noble's auction of the printing plate. He knew I had the note, and the price sort of went up a little bit, but a fabulous item, fabulous twosome. I've reversed the plate so as you could read it a bit more easily. But yeah, so anyway, let's move along another one. The Bank of New South Wales share script. I was glad to get that out of a recent auction, because when we went and did I started it with the bank in 1963. Lasted 15 years sort of thing. Still had a soft spot for them and what have you, and then certainly wanted to explore their archives. When I went into their archives, the banknotes were just in little brown envelopes. And I kept on opening these brown envelopes that were labelled sort of thing, but nothing in them. I didn't have them catalogued. Obviously, that somebody with light fingers had removed some. But as far as the share script was concerned, these ones were, there's about 3 types. This early type, there was only about a dozen of them, and they used to keep these to give to as a presentation to retiring general managers. But as I say, this one came up through a noble auction, and I was happy to obtain that. On vellum, early Australian document, fabulous. The signatures can all be Wentworth and Wild and Campbell. Story for each one of them, and you can imagine £100 for a share certificate. I'm sure they paid them in a contributing basis, though. They didn't have to lash out straight with the £100, but even £10 back in 1818 would have been a lot of money. Okay, next. This was mainly to entertain the guys at the IBNS conference, but these were. This is what did I say it was? Can you come down now? In November. These were, yeah. I've only ever found the one, but this was prior to them issuing licences and rights. And of course, what the attraction was
was printed in Goulburn. That's an illustration of how the banks flocked to the goldfields to relieve people of money and give them their paper currency that they'd printed. But that was a lot later, about 1890 at West Wyalong in New South Wales. Next. So there's a bit of a booty. Imagine what that'd be worth today. That's Halterman, and he was a keen photographer too. So and there'd be a story about the Halterman nugget as well. I don't think he owned all those, but just the statue of these guys in that small people. And they must have really dressed up for that occasion, because the miners had a really rough time going. And that's at Bathurst, and the Prattleys were from Bathurst, so that was a keen photograph. Oh, and these photographs came from the Mining Museum. When I was doing some research in that, I went down to the Mining Museum and said, you know, have you got any photos of gold mining? No, they came out with a box of them. And he says, you can take whatever you like, take it, you know, whatever you want, just take. So, you know, I managed to get one of Bathurst because I was keen about that. All right, next. All right, the Miner's Right, once again in Vellum. Any early ones are very hard, 1863. They're usually crumpled and showing heaps of wear because the miners had to have them on their person, so they're multi-folded and what have you. But to try and get one from each colony is really, really difficult. Have done it. I even got one from New Zealand. And they're our brothers across the ditch, aren't they? Right, next. Okay, so then we've got number one bank check. Although I'm a bit keen about number ones, but don't seem to get enough of them. But this is Hugh Trail Armitage in his capacity as accountant at the Commonwealth Bank back in 1913. And then, of course, you're familiar with how he became the signatory, what was he then, the governor, I think, of the Reserve Bank, or
Commonwealth Bank.
Commonwealth Bank it would have been then, wouldn't it, in the 1940s. And of course the Armitage McFarlane 10 bob star and £1 star are incredibly rare items. Can you press, and of course here we go. So you can see I get carried away with mining, and had our own checks when I was pretty flamboyant with the coin colony, and used to put them through the system and then had to buy them back. But had these printed by John Sands, who were security printers, and of course this one was printed by John Sands. John Sands, I don't think they're still going, but we had two of their, one a chief engineer about 2 doors up from us, and one next door neighbour who was the general manager of John Sands. So that was another enticement to go and see them and get them to print our cheques for us. Well, you can see the numbering, it's so important. The coin colony, TCC, with the micro encoding and what have you. Signatures changed, that's one of my early signatures, but as I got older, you know, it's changed a little bit. Okay, next. So, my interest in postal notes. And of course what this one represents is it's showing off the watermark, and the reason being is this is one of the uniform series postal notes that each state issued, but they're very frugal and they called in paper from the colonies to produce. And keep in mind that these were introduced in 1912, and then as things rapidly moved along, you got the First World War appearing. So paper was a shortage. We didn't produce paper back in those days, so it was all imported. So, but this one has got the Commonwealth of Australia postal note. That's the watermark that was officially allocated to the uniform series. Next. But then you got the paper coming in from other places, and this is it's a bit hard to see, isn't it? But that's actually New South Wales paper being used on a Tasmanian issue. Next. And then this is actually Queensland. I always think of it. Queensland, you can just see being used on a also on a Tasmanian postal note. It's just another added interest one has when researching some of these items. When different ones come up for auction, the guys are wondering what's he worrying about the watermark. Okay, next. Now these to me are, really exciting stuff, because back in about 1892 the Postmaster General from New Zealand, Joseph Ward, attended the conference. We were all intermingling and such, and so he attended the conference of the colonies here, and he started saying because of the banking crisis in the 1890s and such, he says he's going to produce postal notes that are going to circulate as banknotes. Now, none of these have turned up in an issued state, but a friend in America had a number of these. Now, even though he lists that 14 of them exist, only they come in different forms. They might be just a front, they might have drilled holes through them, but the number that show the front and the back are probably out of the 14, probably number 6. These were produced in New Zealand, the engraver being this A. Cousins, who got awarded awards for some of his stamps that he produced, but they sent over, for the £5, they sent over to Thomas Delarue what they wanted for the £5 one. What I discovered, these have never been recorded in any of the banknote books on New Zealand, and to me it's a pity, even though the latest book on New Zealand paper currency, I signed him up as a member of the Postal Order Society, and he assures me that if he does an update to it, that he will include them. He produced a beautifully produced book on New Zealand paper currency that's profusely illustrated, but I understand he was flush with funds from Bitcoin. And he'd done well with Bitcoin, so he put it in the Numismatics. Very good lad. But all I discovered was the watermark initially back in 1996. I wrote about them, but then I was slack not to follow up the sales that Spink held for Delarue archives material. So these subsequently came up. There was 5 of them, and once again in a different format. This one is two-sided with the watermark and such, but not in the colour trial, but or proof, not in the colour that was actually issued. The actual issue one was distinctly blue. The other one ended up getting lost in the mail. Gone forever, so 4, and the other 2 don't resemble. They're different colours, so this is a very important item. And I was fortunate enough to buy that from a New Zealand auction. Next, I should have mentioned to you, they circulated that the pound was introduced in 1894, and then the £5 in 1895. They circulated as currency up until 1901, when they were replaced by another set of postal notes that also were legal tender and served as currency, but they were the number that are out there, each one's basically unique. They started at a shilling and went up to £1, and they continued to circulate till 1908. Let's go next, please. Alrighty, so territory of Papua New Guinea, once again, great item. Thought this would attract the boys. We've got to get more people coming along to these meetings. But pretty primitive setup up in New Guinea, and I think it's still fairly backward. They're certainly trying, but I still wouldn't be surprised if there was cannibals on the western side. My great buddy from banking days, an Armenian guy, gone too young, at 40 years of age, but we loved him, Andrew. When I was in the bank at Mossman branch, I was the first teller. He was the inquiry clerk. Loved Elvis. He had a little 850, and can you imagine, Mrs. Jones, you've got a lot of parcels there. Let me drive you home. So he drive her home to Balmoral. Oh, Ross, could you take care of the inquiry counter too? Oh yeah, sure, Andrew, sure. Bloody wog. And then I got intrigued about this guy. So I was talking to my brother, and he said, "Well, what do you call him?" And I said, "Oh, he's just another wog." He said, "Well, stop calling him wog." So I stopped calling him wog, and we ended up just so close. We used to work together. He'd always remember a second job down at Claude Fay's in the drying and bottle shop. He'd always remember the order. Rossi'd have to keep on going back and forth. We'd have a lunch together, a dinner after our work each time. We'd have a favourite bottle of wine. The best one we got was a Lindeman's Langhorns Creek, 1966. I think 5 dozen of them came up for auction. We both went to the auction, only to find we were both bidding against each other. We got them, but he was a very eager guy. He ended up with a Ferrari Dino, and he waited for us up at the toll gates at Asquith, heading north, and we came up in this fancy BMW that I had, but you know, totally crazy. And he wanted to see who could outdo each other. 130 mile an hour, pretty silly. But anyway, the Dino didn't beat us. We level pegged. So, of course, he went up. I'm digressing. Thank God I've got an hour. Don't go to sleep, John. He went up on the counter at Rabaul, and he'd get his ruler because the young ladies had come in to make a deposit and their breasts would be on the counter, and he'd be pushing them off the table. Right, another little, I think there's an add-on. It just shows you that was issued in the 1940s. These photos would have been around the time. Next, and of course that shows you the thatched roofs, houses and such that they were accommodated in. But a pretty wild lot. But I'm told they've just got a heart of gold. They're just absolutely superb. We certainly hope they're mad keen about the rugby league. We hope they can knock off Queensland at some stage. Next, this was slightly different. There was a difference with the other one where it said Papua and New Guinea. This one's just New Guinea. It's got a relief number 2 stamping on it, which was used mainly for passes and that, but it obviously either picked up the wrong stamp or whatever, but that's wonderful atlas that could obtain. Next. Oh, here we go, more. But, yep, well, they're our neighbours. They helped us so much in World War II. You know, the Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels and what have you. I think we've got close ties still with New Guinea, but it's a pity the way China's moving in. China's taking their timber and trying to move in to mine gold there too. Next. Alright, so thanks, Mark. Steel Waterman, I think he's the father of the young waterman who's doing coin review now. He turned this up, sold it to Trevor Wilkin. Trevor Wilkin sold it to Mark. I didn't even get a look. It was dreadful, dreadful. So, Mark was, I don't want to say anything nasty about him, but he was loath to share things with you. He was keen to gain knowledge or anything from you. I was in the doorway, no, Mark was in the doorway of his Narrabeen home when we went down to help clear it out. There was a couple of bins, there was more trucks there and what have you. He was telling me what a bad day of his life this was, and this was nearing the end. And I was down there actually, he'd offered to give me his research on canteen orders, which he'd written about in coin review and what have you. So I was keen to follow up on that, but and I gave him word that I'd credit him and what have you. So I said, what about the postal notes? And he said, he says, you'll get a chance at those, because I heard a whisper through the banknotes. He gave his banknote collection to the British Museum. And that's a bit of a joke in itself also, and a sad reflection of times. As Jim, as an executor, he's got a catalogue, all the banknotes, and in turn, the British Museum may not even want a lot of them because they've already got them. And so there was a locked room in there, and we managed to open it up, and out came the postal notes. And I said, well, yeah, give me a look before they go, because they're going off to Jim's for safekeeping and auction. So found the Norfolk Island. And he says, don't worry, you'll have a chance of buying it at the auction. Thanks, mate. But I didn't get to see other material that we had. But anyway, moving right along. Norfolk Islands, so these were done in very small numbers. When I say small, I don't know how well the administrator must have known people in the government, but these would have been done in hundreds. These are not known in any private collections. That's out of Australia Post archives. And then this one we actually made up. Right, I got my son to help me guess how it was, how it would have looked, because what they did, this was for that interim period between in 1966, when the 14th of February they were meant to introduce the new postal orders, but they didn't have them ready in time. Other things were more important. So for 6 months, the postal notes that had been in use, ones like these, were decimalised. Extremely hard to find. One in Mark's collection. But this one, I formulated it from records in the Reserve Bank, and the printing run for each one of these was 30 of each denomination. Geez, I bet note printing was wrapped in getting that order. Next. Now, here we go, a Queensland example of the earliest government fractional currency used in Australia. There's no term of validity, payable to order. They circulated as small change. There was always a shortage of silver out in the outbacks of Queensland, and so these came in the denominations of 1 shilling, 2 and 6, 5 shillings and 10 shillings. And once again, if any of them are well worn. What I was able to prove is Laurie actually signed the majority of them, and by chance I bought a hoard of unused ones, different denominations, and I was able to, with the numbers that were there, the serial numbers, work out that these were the remainders. So in other words, these were and they were in strips of 4, and we calculated that they were made 8 to a sheet. And then you'll notice the rough the perforation there joining the other one, and there would have been a counterfoil here, and of course that's the deckled edge of proving that it was handmade paper. Next. So here we go. Western Australia ended up copying them. These are rather dear to my heart. That one sold unbeknown to me, but luckily I knew where it went to, and he shared the photographs and that with me. But this one I got from Ray Jewell, and it took me years and years and years to befriend Ray. I ever went to Max Stern and he was the offsider there. You'd get talking to him, because we used to go down every month to the Downing sales down there and pick up decimal proof sets, and also call in at another Reg Williams maybe. He always had the odd Melbourne Centenary florin for us to take back home. But at this stage, Ray had moved into a an arrangement with Jim Noble, so he was running Noble above Redwood in the same building. But on one occasion went there and he had sold me his postal notes that he had, which I was ecstatic. The first ones, as you can see, the watermark, going into these watermarks again, this is a C over A, which indicated that that was Crown Agent paper, and that represented the first of the issue that came out. This second one was a further print run that they got, and that shows the government of Western Australia with the swan swimming to the left. Once again, that they would, upon issue, they would cancel the fee stamp, and then upon cashing it in, it was at the top. Very hard to read, but what we were able to establish was that this one circulated for some decades. Once again, no payable to bearer, no term of validity, and so that they were used as currency in Western Australia. Next. The signature on that previous one, the issuing officer, was this R.A. Scholl. Served as acting Postmaster General from 1st of May 1889 until his sudden death and so on. This was the last stagecoach out of town. That was the original post office in Perth, and that's the trek they made from Perth, for instance, down to Pinjarra. Next. So then we come to South Australia, and some more celebrities. Gwendolyn Todd up there to the right with her dad. Charles Heathertree Todd, this one here. And you talk about famous Australians. Well, he'd be down the list from Florey, but he'd have to be considered because what he was an astronomer, but not Australian born, a bomb, probably a 10-quid bomb. He was given the task of doing the telegraph line from Adelaide up to Darwin back in the 1880s, early 1880s. So that was a scene where he was with his some of his workers. This is a photo of R.J. Beckworth, which will come. Ralph Beckworth, which will come. Next slide, please. So here we go. R.J. Beckworth, hand signed, and these South Australian ones were introduced in 1887. But see the number again? Now Rod, look at this, number 51. Where are you? Oh, there it is. So number 51 shilling, definitely the only one existing from the first issue that's to date, from Burundi in 1896, more than a decade after they started. So they didn't issue a lot up in little old Burundi up there where the arrow is. Beckworth, family man, and that came out, and he was in a band in the, what's it called, something Glee Club. But that's fascinating, the early Aussie history, it really is. And you can get very much involved. But imagine tracking the telegraph line through these parts back in the 1880s. You can imagine what you came across and such. And of course, Alice Springs is Todd's wife's name, and then you've got the Todd River and so on. So but no doubt these will all be renamed. you know, as we pay respects to our older people, different people. Next. So, giving you an idea of how a postal note's produced, Gwendolyn Todd would have sent over her designs to Delarue, and this is a hand-painted essay. It's as if it's on tracing paper. And then the first ones that were printed that I showed you, the issued one, this would have been a proof which was amended, but then the ones that were issued were on government paper at the time, and it shows Britannia with meeting an Aborigine, making friends with him on a rock there. So that was the early government paper of South Australia. Next. Oh, this starts a whole new batch. I was going through these and found they were made out to an H. Yarrington. Next. So that was Hilda, and that's Hilda, Pearl and Gwendolyn, and Mother's up. Oh, you can do the arrows, please. The arrows will come up. That's Mum. Mum was running a boarding house, and this was at Rylstone, west of Lithgow. Only a small town, but young Hilda left school early, and no doubt had great lessons from Mum running the boarding school, and she took up with a fellow who ran the general store, and I won't get back to notes, we'll just continue on. He decided to go to the First World War and enlisted, and he sold the offered the store to her for 50 quid. She was underage, older than there. So her sisters bailed her out, and so she had the general store there. And moving right along, in the 1930s they introduced lotteries to New South Wales, and Rylstone was chosen to have a licence to sell lottery tickets, being the only one out of Sydney on a trial basis. So these postal notes ended up coming from everywhere, wanting lottery tickets. Next one. That's the old post office where they should have been cashed. Next. And this is, they traded between 1916 and 2004. These are the older Betty Edwards and such, and a daughter, and they closed up in 2004, ending an 88-year history of the store in Rylstone, which moved up and down the main street a little bit there. Next. Okay. So I thought I'd just show these, asking anybody ever seen those? Nobody's got any? There you go. I better read you a bit about these. We might get new. No, as I say, I apologise for being a bit disorganised, but I've had a rather tumultuous week. These as you know, travellers' cheques were a form that the banks introduced, and it was a good money earner for the banks because they issued them in foreign currencies. So they didn't only make money on the foreign currency, but they charge you on the cheques, and of course if you didn't bank the cheques, they kept the money anyway. So the post office thought they'd have a go at this, and they introduced these around 1990. But they only lasted a couple of years, and why somebody didn't cash these in, I'm quite surprised because, you know, like $170, you know. Just think, Rod, you could have been up at the Reserve Bank swapping them for polymers. Quite colourful. They're done in about 5 colours. There's lithographic printing and intaglio. And nobody's ever seen them before. Alrighty. Oh, Watermark, our dear koala, and then they also had Australia Post with their P, and that appears on them too. I couldn't get a good photograph. Hard taking photographs of Watermarks. Alrighty, next. So, surely some mums would remember receiving these. Child endowment, brought in the 1940s and then disbanded probably 1960, something like that. But yes, I did a lot of work on these ones, and then I discovered that they introduced these IBM carded ones, and that's the only one that's ever turned up, and I found that by mistake, and it had sold in a noble sale several years earlier than how I discovered it. So trying to trace it, and of course Jim's no good with computers, but Bobby Clemson managed to work out the buyer for me. So I approached him. It was Shields, you probably heard of Shields stamps and such in Melbourne. So lo and behold, contacted him. He said, "Oh no, he got rid of that years ago, you know." And then lo and behold, my good mate Martin Walker in Adelaide sends me a scan of it and said, "Oh Ross, you might be interested in this." Shields has brought it over. He put it away some years ago for me and was bringing it over because they used to get a private box to watch the AFL, and Shields would make an effort to have something special for Martin, and so I ended up procuring it because Martin didn't want it. But lo and behold, as I say, that's the only one that I've ever seen. And I'm going through the Powerhouse Museum's collection and come across about a group of about 20 of them. Now where it becomes interesting for me, maybe not for you, but I wanted to know what the punch holes represented. And so I got a bright mathematician over in England, Gary Oddy, who's an excellent speaker on Zoom and does lectures in different places. He could derive it. Initially I only had this one, but because I've got the group now, he can crack the code. So we're in the way of cracking the code because there's no records of them. I've been in touch with the IBM and they don't even reply to me. But these ones that the Powerhouse has got were all for this new Lambton, and I can't help thinking they must have sent them out there on some sort of trial basis, because they precede that. I've got ones of these that are 1959, whereas this one's 1959 and the 1958. So I think they're just like Rod was referring to trial polymer notes at times. I think they're having a trial with these to see how they work, but we'll get to the bottom of it. But it intrigues me. Next. Okay, thanks Mark again, you know, dear Mark. A number one. And Morocco was an area just off from Port Moresby. In used condition. How he came by it, well, he never told me, he never showed it to me. But I managed to get that out of his auction lots. They're put up in a quite a different format. I was livid when I saw it because they are all bulked together, and there'd be anything like New Zealand, about 170 of them, all in the one lot. And it was one of these timed auctions, and boy oh boy, they go through every something like 15 seconds, and you think you've got it. I've got it. Bid on to the next one. Go back. No, you haven't got it. Somebody else has come in and it's extended for 2 minutes. Drove me nuts. I'd already been warned about the New Zealand lot that I think it had an estimate of $500 on it. But it was over $2,000, not worth bidding on. Anyway, I got up to $3,000 and thought I had it. But when I went back to it, no, didn't have it. So I got it at $4,000. Plus the extras. But I was very glad to get it actually. I've painted myself into a corner with these postal notes and postal orders because unfortunately they're so darn rare that you guys who saw the Traveller's Money haven't seen them before. They're only a minor interest to other collectors. The same with the Postal Order Society. We've got about 100 members throughout the world, and probably, at the Zoom meetings we're lucky to get 10. But we do replay them like Rod does on YouTube, and I'm sure a lot of people take advantage of that. But this one is May 75. They didn't gain independence till September 75. So as far as I'm concerned, I've got an Australian number one. Okay, next. Yeah. Now see, talking about extraordinary Australians, and once again this guy would be down the list from Flory, but had a significant interest. Next, here he is, Mr. Corbett. Like my signature changed, he signed that at the age of about 20 in 1900, and then this one was in the 1940s. Next. Okay, Queensland. Right.
Go Maroons.
But once again, I'm sorry, I was going to read out all his history. A totally extraordinary guy that revolutionised the started in the post office after a good schooling and such, rose through the ranks. He went to the Boer. Yeah, he went to the Boer War as a youngster, decorated and what have you. Came back and he was technically minded and what have you, and he revolutionised the sorting machinery for Australia Post. And there was other things, but a great Queenslander, so I salute Queensland once again. Next. Oh, there you go. So we're moving along, but we haven't ended. Be patient. Are there any questions?
Wait, there is more.
Any questions?
No questions? You all want to go for you all want to put on your food bag or something, Right, next, wait. So, just a couple more, please. Right. Next. Well, look at this guy, right? I love them. They are just magnificent. Right?
Python.
We've got them round our place. And normally Rossi's been good. Rossi remembers getting the one out of our roof, and he was about 6 or 7 foot long.
Wow.
I'd do Steve Irwin and just catch him on by the tail and get Carol to hold one of my seed bags and try and get him in, but I couldn't get him, and he was coming back on me. So we were racing around like this, but we finally bagged him, right? But we hadn't seen snakes for a few years since the bushfires, but this guy appeared, and he had a bloody great lump in him.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, you bastard, you've either got one of my birds, or is it a rat? So moving right along, now you might have to, I've got this mixed up fractionally, just move right along, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Right, now can we get that working?
Working how?
Oh, no, you can't get the video going. No. That's
Double tap.
It might have been linked on yours, I don't think it went in.
Yeah, all right. I don't think I'll hold you up, but I've been having a number of falls, and this and this were the most recent ones. I've worked it out actually that it's the darn boots. I get boots, rubber boots that I go around the yard with, are slightly longer than I probably need. They're not Craftsman fitted. And so when you put your foot down, the toe of the boot's slightly ahead. And what I was coming back from feeding the birds with a thing of food, and I hit the top step, and it moved. It's an old house. Moved a piece of wood, and I fell over. And my son Cameron had just loaded the wood tray up. Beautiful hardwood, beautifully cut. And I went down and right on a piece of timber, and it got me there and there. Oh, jeez. Yeah. So, but the snake attack's quite. It only lasts a couple of seconds, but he got some revenge to me. I should have been Steve Irwin and grabbed his head, bitten it off, and just chucked it away. No. Anyway. Moving right along.
Thank you very much, Ross. Special postman just done.
Oh, that's fabulous. Thank you.
So did you release the snake?
Pardon?
What did you do with the snake? Did you release it?
Yeah. No, we had neighbours that breed snakes, right? And they when I finally went in to see them, lovely people, they had snakes in every room. Oh, I thought, oh my God, oh, you don't have to show this. But the electricity bill went up and up and up. So the snakes were brought down in size and put outside, and they had fewer ones. But he'd always be prepared to come and get a snake from us, because what he'd do, he'd sex it, and if it was a nicer colour than what he had, he'd swap it over, because he got licences for each one of them, and he'd take one down to the quarry that he worked at. But snakes are good. And then the other thing that
before you go on, Ross, we might have to cut it off here. It's time for lunch, and I'd like to make it a special thanks to Jerry for running and chairing that session, and also to our hard-working Stephen over there, whose fingers must be just about bleeding from pressing those buttons all the whole time. So thanks to you guys very much. So I think lunch is about to be served upstairs in the tree house. So,